Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. And this time we have the Skeleton Crew episode. It's going to be episode number 121 for those of you that count. And I do have not one, but two guests. One is Springbok7, a streamer, a magic grinder, limited specialist. The other one is Jason ILTG, also known as the person that tends to forgotten how to lose games in Magic. But hopefully we can put them back on track in losing ways by sharing our view of the game with them.
I know perfectly well how to lose. Excuse me. I have lost twice now in the quarterfinals of a top 8 to Convoke on the draw. That is a way I'm very familiar with losing. Anyways.
Actually, my spiel was that I actually lost fewer games than you over the weekend in competitive Magic because I only lost 2 rounds in my 3-round FNM, and you lost 3 rounds in your 16-round RC. But that's a very, very different. Okay, I'm going to tell that it's sponsored by antijzone.com because I'm technically obliged to, and I would like to thank my patrons. I'm going to chat about it when I have a single episode. So we can go straight into the meat and potatoes of the stream. And if you don't know, like some people in the chat did not know before we started recording, what are we talking about when we talk about skeletons? It's not the Emperor of Bones, the probably only skeleton in the set. No, the skeletons are sort of like skeletons of a deck. And building a skeleton means we take some cards, and we try to make it as realistic as possible, and we try to build a semi-coherent deck based on fundamentals because we never played with the format before. So our construction for the skeleton is that it has 0 to 2 rares and mythics with no duplication, 0 to 8 uncommons with no duplication, and then we fill up the deck with commons, and we try to stick to maximum 2 of each, although sometimes we divert from that rule because I don't know. We want to showcase a build around that requires 4 of a given common because that's how the deck would operate. And you fill up with the non-basic lands and basic lands to make it a 40-card deck. They are very loosely defined rules. If you want to do that kind of stuff, you can do it on your own. And there is a great tool for that. And I didn't change the link, which I assume now is going to be sealdeck.tech/sets/mh3. But if you go to sealdeck.tech, you can find any set, and it gives you the pool of all the cards, and you can drag them along or double click them, and it builds you a deck, and you can sort of play around constructing your decks using that tool. I would highly recommend it. Sealdeck.tech is a great tool for playing sealed. If you play any arena opens, you can just export your deck into it and play around with your builds in there, and maybe save a couple of them so you can sideboard very quickly if you have like 2 builds for the same pool. After sideboarding, they are very good in listening to players' needs, and they add new functionalities as we nag them. Amazing tool and amazing people running it. So thank you very much, sealdeck.tech, for providing us with the tools that help us to build those skeletons. Without them, I can tell you that stream would never happen. It's only because of sealdeck.tech is so quick that we actually managed to get something on board. Bless you.
Thank you.
Right. Every single time we do that, I am talking about the big picture of the removal so that Jason can finish up their skeletons.
Wow, call me out, why don't you?
I'm ready for that. I'm ready for that. And it's a weird set, I have to say. I looked at the removal and it seems a bit off in terms of how it's been designed. And I don't mean that it's bad or anything. It's just that it's different. Because, for example, there is not a single spell that really is designed to kill X1s. Despite there being quite a large number of 1 toughness creatures in the set. The only thing I really found was Arcbound Condor. That's a 4-mana bird. Yeah. It's a 3/3 flyer, and whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. It's not realistically like a spell designed to kill X1s. It's more like an engine card, and it will deal with if you play an artifact, there's 30% of the creatures at common that have toughness of 1, which is actually not little. So it can hit quite a lot. And, a quarter of uncommon creatures have a toughness of 1, and roughly 10% of the rares and mythics have a toughness of 1. Second of all, there is not a shock in this format. There is a couple of sort of mini sweepers that deal 2 damage. And there is Barbarian Ring. That's how deep I had to go to find something that deals 2 damage in this particular set. Normally we get like a spell that gives -2/-2, like Desert's Dew was in OTJ, that maybe scales with the game and later in the game can do more than -2/-2, and that's the power of the card. But on the base level, it will be, yes, I'm sorry, my cat decided that he is the star of the show and he won't move, and I'm not going to move him because why would I? And 50% of commons and uncommons, oh well, there you go, problem solved itself. 50% of commons and uncommons have toughness 2 or less, which is around what is normal for the set. Most of the sets, I'm going to show you the results for multiple sets in a second, but most of the time it's around 50% that there is X2s and lower. This is a cumulative number, so it's not like there's 50% of the 2 toughness creatures. This adds 1 toughness and toughness 2, just to give you the number of creatures that can be killed by Barbarian Ring. Very relevant because I'm sure you're going to have Threshold on turn 3.
And you're going to want to sack your land on turn 3.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. On turn 3, when I have Threshold, I also sacrifice my land. That's the recipe for victory. You learned here first. 3 toughness and less. We have 80% of creatures at common that have that. That's just a lot. That's in the last 15 or so sets, there was maybe 1 that had a similar number. So Wither and Bloom, the one in the black instant that gives target creature -3/-3 until end of turn, is going to kill quite a lot for that 2 mana. So I think this is going to be a pretty premium removal, especially that it has other functionalities. So once you kill something using it, you can later exile it from your graveyard for 2 mana, and you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, which is great because not only you get a bigger creature tagged onto an efficient removal spell, but you also get some functionalities for putting a +1/+1 counter on some creatures. There will be some creatures that, I don't know, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, you can return a creature from a graveyard to your hand, for example. Or there will be something that there are a couple of others.
You can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life.
Exactly. Which I think is going to happen quite a lot if life permits you. So yeah, looks like a premium card, but anything that deals 3 damage will kill those 80% of the creatures. Then we have 4 damage spells. They will kill like 93% of the common creatures, which is roughly what you would expect. And 80% of uncommons, around 80% of rares and mythics. So that Fanged Flames for 2 mana kills a good 85% of all the creatures in the set, which is pretty decent, I would say. And we also don't have any kind of 5 damage spell. So I put Signature Slam because it will frequently deal 5 damage. Imagine that you play it on a thing with 4 power. And that will kill 95% commons, 93% uncommons, and around 85% of the rares and mythics. In rares and mythics, you will get a couple of those big Eldrazi, which have insane toughness, so they won't be killed with anything that is conditional on damage. But 95%, that's relatively normal, so nothing special in here. But what is special about this set is that realistically, from the damage conditional removal, and by damage I mean either damage or -X, you only get 3s and 4s. And the rest of them are, I had to really stretch the definitions of what removal is to find some examples. I'm in the wrong window. There we go. Then there's some conditional removal. I think Expel the Unworthy looks like the best of the lot. It kills 70% of the common creatures without being kicked, because after you play the kicker, it kills everything. It's 1 and a white. Choose target creature with mana value 3 or less. If this spell was kicked, instead choose target creature, so you can choose anything. And then exile the chosen creature. Then its controller gains life equals to its mana value. So it's sort of Swords to Plowshares at home. Sorcery speed, 1 mana more expensive. And if you want to kill something big, you need to pay 5 mana, including 2 white pips. But it's still going to be a pretty good defensive removal, I would guess, because it's cheap enough. For 2 mana, kill a 3-drop. They gain some life, but if you're playing it in defensive speed, you don't care that much because you're going to win the game if it lasts long enough.
There's the Plowshares. Exactly. Kind of the issue with this is that it's like sorcery speed, so you can't snipe their 3-drop on the draw.
Yeah, that is definitely unfortunate. What else do we have here? I mean, we can talk about details of the expel when we talk about any. I assume that some of you might have a skeleton that contains the card because I think I put it in a couple of mine.
I mean, like I don't value the card that highly. I don't think it just runs a bit counter to what white is trying to do, and like the double white cost makes it hard to splash.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
And every single, I think, skeleton I put white aligned aggressively to me, so I was putting the was it Thraben Charm?
Yeah, that one seems much better.
That one seems pretty good. The one that deals double the amount of damage as creatures you control to target creature. And it doesn't have to attack or block, which is unheard of in white, that I can actually kill things at sight using direct damage.
It also snipes bestow creatures, which you can maybe use to get like a combat blowout.
But okay, other one that looks interesting is Ajani Fells the Godsire. This one is the sort of budget version of Elspeth Beats Death. Was it
Elspeth Conquers Death?
Elspeth Conquers Death.
Yeah. Elspeth Conquers Death.
Budget indeed.
It's 5 mana. The first chapter is exile target creature opponent controls with power 3 or greater, which is roughly what the first chapter of Elspeth Conquers Death was doing. Then you make a 2/1 cat warrior token with vigilance counter. And then chapter 3 is target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. All of them are relevant, and I think we're going to be playing this card. Especially that, it only hits like 15% of the commons and around 23% of uncommons and 30% of rares and mythics. But it doesn't account for the fact that there are plenty of creatures that grow as the game progresses. Because, for example, Adapt is one of the mechanics and Bestow is the other mechanic. So I'm pretty sure that we're going to find good enough targets for it in your deck that it's definitely you're going to play 1 copy of them every single time, I think. Don't you think? Nope.
I mean, I actually looked at this number and I was like, wait, this does like worse than I thought it did.
There's always a chance that I've completely screwed up a Scryfall search, but I think it was roughly. Oh, that's power. I can't.
I can check it real quick. Power 3 or greater at common. There are 14 out of
50. So yeah, it would be around 30%. Yeah. Oh no, that should be more.
14 out of 50.
Yeah, no, it's 14 out of like 60. Wait.
No, if it's 14
out of like 43, so that's like 30%. Yeah, I think that's a bit low.
Yeah, okay, maybe it's a bit low. Okay, it will hit more than. I have to update my data thing. I probably looked for things that have higher than 3 and not 3 or higher. That is very realistic. Foul Strike.
Yeah. An interesting form of cycling there.
Yeah.
Reinforce. What is? Oh god.
So Foul Strike kills the creature with flying, which is only like 15 to 20% depending on the rarity of the creatures in the set. But it has Reinforce too. So for 3 mana, you can basically discard it and sort of channel it. And
you
put
can cast the Feral Invocation. kind
Yep.
of.
Uncounterable feral invocation.
Yeah, which is, I think, a decent combat trick on its own, and with some utility as a kill the flyer in a deck that cares about the counters. I'm pretty sure it's going to be playable as a one-off.
Yeah, I mean, it can be playable, but feral invocation has not been like a good rate effect at like in a normal set, and this is a Modern Horizon set, which will have a higher power level. It's kind of like, bad rates on both sides, and yeah, it makes it more flexible, but doesn't make it that much more main deckable, I think.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
I mean, I think it will depend because if you have again those effects that putting a +1/+1 counter on something gives you the extra value, you might be playing it if you have like 3-4 of those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
including the Eternal Witness, including the Gargantua, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life on top of the +2/+1/+1 counters, and having the flexibility of killing a large flyer if there is a need for that. I think that's going to be playable, but I don't think it's going to be like an automatic main deck. It will be a synergy kind of filler, I guess, card in decks that. Yeah.
Very sneaky of them to put Reinforce on a non-permanent, so you can't just go off with that Eternal Witness.
Yeah.
Right?
I was.
Yeah. They probably did that intentionally.
I was looking at that option, and I was very disappointed that I didn't find it. And then we have Null Elemental Blast. It costs colorless mana, so keep in mind you have to spend colorless mana to cast that spell. You cannot just tap your forest and then pretend that it's colorless. Instant, counter target multicolor spell, destroy target multicolor permanent. It hits 17% of commons, 8% of uncommons, and 23% of rares. And it's just not enough, I think.
No, like you bring it in if you know your opponent has like a really good bomb.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. This is the definition of like a sideboard card. But like
especially that some of the so-called multicolored cards in this set are actually colorless, so you can't even hit them because there is a whole teamer cluster of devoid creatures, and they will cost green and red, but they're still colorless. You cannot hit it with that.
Yep.
In its defense, they're the common multicolor cards, but again, not every archetype will be playing them. So main decking it will be sometimes a dead card completely, and that probably is going to be way too often. And also, in the end, if you put it in your deck because maybe you're going to be lucky enough to hit a target, that's not a good excuse to put a card in your deck. Maybe a target is not
hard to cast in your average deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are the Evolving Wilds cycle at common.
Yeah.
Like all the tri-lands that are like they tap for colorless, and then you can sack it as an Evolving Wilds for like one of 3 different land types, and they also have cycling. So those let you get colorless mana into your deck that you can also at any point turn into colored mana, which makes it a lot less hard. There's also snow-covered wastes in the set, which is really funny. You can draft a snow-covered wastes.
Yeah, but the snow-covered part does nothing.
Yes,
I mean,
I believe
those exist, but I still feel like if your deck doesn't really want colorless sources, otherwise, you probably don't really want to put them in.
But
it is fixed.
It will be necessary if you want to build Eldrazi Christmas themed deck.
That's true.
We're going to go to the lands because I think that they're one of the most interesting features of this format from what I see. And also there's not like a ton of sweepers. There were plenty of sweepers in OTJ, and I had to fill this slide with like 2 rows of cards and was running out of space and had to make them really small. And here I just found
OTJ had 1 billion cards then, so
yeah,
it's true. This one is not a slouch either. There's like good 300 cards in it.
A lot of these are like one-sided or can be one-sided is the other thing.
Yeah, that's true. So in the sweeper territory, we have the Wrath of the Skies. That's X white. You get X energy. And then you may pay any amount of energy, destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy paid this way. Which means that if you play a deck that doesn't have like cheap drops, you can cast this card relatively cheap, sweep the whole weenie part of the opponent's deck and keep your bigger things. Or you can generate like a lot of energy on turn 1 and turn 2. You can get like up to 5 energy, and then you can cast it for 2 mana because you don't need to get the extra energy anymore, and sweep big things for quite a cheap investment and still have mana to play something after the sweeper. So yeah, looks pretty solid, but again, the same problem as with the Expel the Unworthy. It just doesn't seem like super on plan for the white decks in this format. They seem to be more aggressively slanted. So I don't know how good the card is going to be. Maybe there's going to be like once in a while you're going to get this white X control kind of archetype, and then you can play it. Then we have Ugin's Binding, which is 2 and a blue for Devoid, so it's a colorless spell. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner hand. And you might ask me, okay, what's sweepery about Unsummon, really? Not even Boomerang. Well, whatever. Bounce a permanent.
Wipe away, I guess.
The sweeper part of it comes to when you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may exile it from your graveyard. Well, exile Ugin's Binding from your graveyard. When you do, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. So you basically return everything that your opponent has on board back to their hand. Which is a sort of upheaval kind of sweeper. What is it?
Well, I mean, upheaval hits lands.
Okay, yeah.
But
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's very backbreaking. When
Cyclonic
happens,
Rift.
right?
It is a Cyclonic Rift, isn't it?
Yeah. You cast your Eldrazi, and like you have a big creature in play, and they have no board in play anymore. It's very backbreaking if you pull it off.
Yeah, if you pull it off. And I don't think it's going to be super hard to pull it off. The only thing is that opponent will know that it's coming because you will have the Ugin's Binding in the graveyard.
I mean, you can like end step this on like turn 6 or whatever, and then play your Eldrazi on turn 7.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is just like the front side, like casting it as a bounce spell just gives you a bit of time to get to your 7 mana creature, right?
There is no doubt in my head that this card is going to be good because that bounce is literally what the Eldrazi deck probably wants to do. It wants to stall the early game so it can proceed to the late game, which they should have more power, I guess. So yeah, this is going to be pretty powerful, and sweeper that doesn't kill but still is backbreaking, as Jason said. There we have Ashling Flame Dancer. That's 4 mana, 4/4, 2 red. Legendary Elemental Shaman. You don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. Okay. Very key thing. And it has Bagecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, discard a card, then draw a card. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, Ashling Flame Dancer deals 2 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. And that's the sweeper part, the mini sweeper. It just basically kills all the small things. If you cast 2 spells on a turn after Ashling Flame Dancer survived, and if you do it for the third time, you actually get extra 4 mana so you can continue casting your spells. If it survives, I think that is pretty realistic in some kind of a red-blue deck to cast 2 spells. I mean, it will just happen. There's a couple of cantrips. You can play it in such a way that you will build it, and then it makes this mini sweeper. So it's possible to use it. Again, one-sided kind of sweeper because it only deals damage to opponent stuff and opponent themselves.
Small fun fact. If your last card in hand is a spell and you like an instant or sorcery and you cast that card, the Ashling trigger will go on the stack before the spell resolves, and it'll say discard a card then draw a card, which with an empty hand just means draw a card, and then your spell will resolve. So like even if you like cast a divination as your last card, you'll just draw an extra card. It's pretty neat.
Okay, that's that. I was actually thinking about it when I was reading the card, and yes, it doesn't say you have to discard for it to resolve. So if you have 0, you're just gonna draw. Ral the Implicit Maze is sort of similar to Ashling in a way, and by that I mean it also sweeps for 2. It's a saga. So chapter 1 is Ral and the Implicit Maze deals 2 damage to each creature and planeswalker your opponent's control. So again, one-sided, it won't damage your stuff. And then it has other abilities which are not relevant, but I mean, it culminates in making a Spellgorger Weird token, which is a Spellgorger Weird.
And then you can populate that token with a couple cards on the side.
Oh
It's true.
god. Wow.
This is the previous tokens that were like actual cards. I don't think had the mana cost of the creature on them. So
Oh yeah, it does have a mana cost. Wow.
Yep.
It's a proper copy then.
yeah, like the other ones from like Planar Chaos, I think, were just like, it was just like a land or elf, but I don't think it had a mana cost.
Mm.
So that's interesting.
I think it's also like it's a playable saga. It's an uncommon, so I wouldn't expect it to do miracles for me. But I'm pretty sure that it's going to be okay to really, really good against some decks.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a great card.
And the fact that it only hits your opponent's creatures is a big redeeming quality for it, I guess. And we have lastly, but probably not definitely not leastly, Toxic Deluge. 2 and a black sorcery. It's a reprint, so some of you probably know it. As an additional cost to cast it, pay X life, and all creatures get -X until end of turn. Sort of scalable wrath that requires you to invest some life, but you get the flexibility of being able to kill exactly everything, or maybe even keeping something that you control with large toughness alive while killing most of the stuff. Oh. So those are the sweepers. There's only 5 of them. Again, I think last set we had something like 11, if I remember correctly, but I might not remember it correctly at all. Here we have the cumulative target count for given damage spells. That's the thing that I was talking about, the comparison. As you can see, 29% of the X1s in the set is quite a lot. Only Brothers War in the last 8 sets or so, or 9 sets or so, was at the same level. If you remember OTJ at all, still, OTJ had only 16% of the X1, so it's pretty much opposite. Obviously, OTJ had a lot of mercenaries, but actually, when you think about it, this set will also have a lot of 0/1 Eldrazi spawn tokens that could be hosted by X1 removal, and yet we don't have any X1 removal. And when we look at the cumulative 2 damage, things that are killed by that, it's around 54%. It's also close to the top, but those values are pretty close to each other. The lowest we had recently was LTR and Phyrexia LB1 with 47%. The top was March of the Machine with 55. 54 is like close to the top, not exactly there, but the spread between the top and bottom value here is pretty low. Where I see the difference is at the X3s and lower. 80% of the creatures at common are at this value, and it's similar to Wilds of Eldraine. And these two are quite outliers compared to everything else. Most recently, the sets that we had, OTJ had 69%, MKM had 71%, and LCI had 72%. So like a whole, 20-25% fewer of those things that are killed by a lightning bolt, basically. And I just don't know how this will impact the game, but I guess like 4 toughness or 3 power on a creature might be important. 4 toughness might be important because usually those statistics are relatively square.
I guess it also means your 3/3 is going to be more relevant than it was in the last format on average.
Potentially. And the last part is not really that important. 4 damage. There is not much big stuff at common. That's the bottom line of that. Speed is fake. Well, yeah, I agree with that. So anything interesting? Well, first of all, there is only 7% of things with more than 4 toughness, which is relatively low. There is also not many creatures with a toughness of exactly 4, only 12% at common, and that's the lowest number, ex aequo with LCI and March of the Machine. OTJ, quarter of all the creatures at common had 4 toughness. So that's the difference we're talking about. It's like 2 times more in OTJ than it is in here. And yeah, quite a lot of X1s compared to the previous sets. And that's I think that's what we can say about the creature sizing. Right, so we can move to the themes of the set. And I think that if we go down to everything, there's 3 big themes in this set. And the first one is energy. Those themes do span multiple color pairs. And in case of energy, it focuses around the Jeskai color pairs. So we have 36 cards in the set that look at energy, and 25 of them are in the Jeskai colors. There are 2 cards that can only produce energy and don't use it for anything. There are 5 cards that use energy, but they don't produce any. And most of the cards of those 36, so 29 of those cards, produce energy and can use some at the same time, but not necessarily at the rate that they produce. So sometimes they produce more energy than they need. Sometimes they produce a bit of energy, but they need a lot. And sometimes they are like reusable sources of energy. And it's going to be a nice riddle on how you manage your energy pool and how you want to use it most efficiently. Because there will be some cards like, I don't know, 1 mana, you get 3 energy, and then you can deal X damage to any creature or planeswalker, where X is the amount of energy that you spend. And you can use this card. Oh, I get 3 energy. I use 1 of it, and I kill your X1, and I keep 2 energy in my pool. Or you can use it in, I have 2 energy in my pool. I cast this 1 mana spell. I get 3 more, and I kill something with 5 toughness. So it's going to be interesting gameplay on how to manage this energy pool. Common rates is
sorry. I just want to say, like, a lot of times we talk in Magic about, various resources, right? Card advantage, tempo, mana, I don't, various kinds of different resources that you're managing. And there's various ways to convert between them, right? Like, you could say, like, oh, divination is a card that gives you more card advantage at the expense of, like, tempo and mana, right? Like, you're converting one resource into another. And sometimes that's more nebulous, but with energy, that's like it's a bit more concrete, right? You're literally tracking a number that goes up and down, and you're budgeting it and spending it in various ways, right? And like like the examples you gave with that, like, 1 mana removal spell at common, that's a card that you can either choose to, like, turn your card into, like, some amount of energy plus, like, a small effect, or, like, the card plus some energy into a big effect. Lots of things like that,
Like, you can also choose to just, get 3 energy off of it. Like, maybe that's a somehow irrelevant mode, right?
Yeah.
Good point.
There's a lot.
I mean, I would
interesting
hope
decisions.
not to have to do that, but I mean, if that wins me the game, I'm happily taking it.
Yeah, like, there's also the interesting thing is that you said, most of the things that produce and use them at the same time, like, are, it produces 2 energy and then spends 2 energy. But there's also some that aren't that, right? With, like, there's some that are produce 3 energy and spend 2 energy, which is really,
those are like the
right.
the Azorius gold commons are like the particular examples for those, I think.
Yeah, like, in the past, like, they've mostly done, like, even amounts of energy spending, so that, if you just played 1 energy card, you would not have any energy left over if you, like, fully used it, right? But here now they're saying, like, oh, actually, if you played this 1 card and you tried to fully use it, you're gonna end up with this awkward 1 energy left, and that incentivizes you to go find another card that can use that 1 energy, right? Which is kind of neat.
Or find some energy elsewhere, and then I can reuse my energy thing from that particular card, because most of them, they have, like, reusable things. So they will produce 3 energy, and then whenever you attack, spend 2. Maybe if you get 1 extra from something, you can use that ability second time and give your creature lifelink or something. I picked a couple of cards here to showcase. One is Inspired Inventor, which is one of those 2 cards I told you that only can produce energy. But I think that this card is a pretty neat glue piece in white, because it's a 3 mana 2/2, and you can choose one. You get either you get 3 energy, or you get a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or you can create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. So you either get, like, a 3/3, or a 2/2 and a 1/1, or a 2/2 and 3 energy, which is a neat choice when you can use some of those things at some times, I guess. Like, you probably want to have, you are a deck that likes modifications but also wants to go white, that's the card for you, I guess. Or if you want to use flyers that use energy, but also flyers can take +1/+1 counters quite happily. I think that card can be pretty neat in this kind of setup, when this modality is actually a choice and not something that you will pick as a default. Because I'm not playing a card that is a vanilla 3/3 for 3 mana with happiness, but if I have a choice that can be useful at some stages, I will be more willing to play Inspired Inventor. Then I get like Bespoke Battle Wagon. I don't think, before you quote me, I don't think that this card is good, but I just gave it as an example of something that can be a repeatable source of energy. It's a 4 mana vehicle. It's a 5/6 with crew 4, which is awfully lot. But it taps to give you 2 energy. So it's like a source of energy. If you have like super intensive energy deck that can make some weird combos, that's probably the kind of a piece that you might be considering playing in some situations. Plus, you can pay 2 energy to tap a creature, or you can pay 3 energy to draw a card, or you can pay 4 energy to turn it into a creature without crewing it. So there's some optionalities there. The art is weird. And then there's Amp Raptor. Are you Jason? Are you the person that's going to be chasing the Amped Raptor dream of turn 1, gain 2 energy, draw a card, turn 2, Amped Raptor, flip something that costs 4 mana and cast it? Or
Well, I mean, I do like energy as a mechanic. I do enjoy like building around things, so quite possibly.
So Amped Raptor has a sort of cascade, but it's a cascade. When it enters the battlefield, you reveal cards from your top of your library and through exile a non-land, and then you may cast that card by paying an amount of energy equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. You get 2 mana with the Amped Raptor. So if you cast it on turn 2, you reveal another 2-drop, you get it for free on the battlefield. But if you reveal a 3-drop, you just burn it. So the trick would be to have more energy in your pool already before you cast the Raptor, and then you can cast something pretty expensive on turn 2 if you reveal it. So if you have like a deck that tops at 4 mana, you can potentially play a 2-drop with a 4-drop on turn 2 if you had 2 energy from a 1 mana spell that gives you a couple of energy. And
it could lead to like some insane like blowouts on like, if you play Tune the Narrative on turn 1, Amp Raptor on turn 2, like you said, get a 4-drop.
And that might be. I think that there's a couple of those extremely powerful curve outs in this format that can happen quite easily, and I'm a bit worried about it because it's going to be problematic, especially like without a shock in the format. Okay, yeah, there is the lightning bolt. I'm pretty sure it's going to be highly contested as a card, so you won't be seeing many of them. And not much of this cheap removal will probably make it very, very important to draft it quite highly. And the last one is Aether Revolt, which I find a nice name for a card, I guess. That's not a reprint, no? It's an original piece for this one. They actually called it after the set.
Yeah.
Is there always in the Modern Horizons a card that's named after a set? Because there was Urza Saga before. Now it's Aether Revolt.
I don't know if there's...
I mean, there was also Mirrodin Besieged.
Oh, that's true. There was. Yeah, you're right.
Oh, wow.
I think that was that in the first Modern
Yeah,
Horizons?
you're right. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
Conflux is a card. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. But Aether Revolt is an example of something that will pay you for having the energy. It's basically as Revolt as long as a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. And also it has, whenever you get 1 or more energy, Aether Revolt deals that much damage to any target. So basically, when you have an energy deck, you can convert any kind of energy gain into damage to face or to targets that you choose. And if you have, like, for example, one of those fetch lands, you sacrifice a fetch land, you cast a card that gives you 3 energy, you can deal 5 damage to anything, and you get the 3 energy.
This gets out of hand very quickly.
Yeah, and I think that this is going to be built around in some kind of probably, I would guess, Izzet kind of deck, because Izzet is naturally conducive to that kind of strategy.
I mean, I may have put this in one of the deck shells. So
yeah, Of note, so something like Amped Raptor, where it says like you get 2 energy, then you may pay any amount of energy. No matter how much energy you pay, that counts as getting 2 energy for Ether Revolt. So like even if you get 2 energy and then pay 2, it doesn't care about the net result. It cares about just how much as you gain. Similarly, there's a card that cares about how much energy you've paid or lost this turn. That again does not care about the net result, just the negative.
Yeah.
You can also do
what-
funny things with Aether Revolt and Molten Gatekeeper if you have fetch lands. You can ping them for 3 damage per creature.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up.
It's just funny.
Yeah, one thing I added to the slide at the very bottom was some common rates for like energy expenditure. And this is where you can see Bespoke Battle Wagon being a bit inefficient, and that a lot of ways that can use energy, you can use 2 energy to get a card. For example, there's a 2-drop that's like pay 6 energy, draw 3. There's a card that's like draw 2, then discard a card at random unless you pay 2 energy. There's like multiple instances of 2 energy being worth a card. And then 3 energy tends to get you like some sort of like good effect that's worth a card. For example, there's the 2 mana deal 3 that has replicate pay 3 energy. So like if every 3 energy that you put into that is another 3 like separate 3 damage, right? That you can direct in very many different ways. So yeah, obviously this is not saying like, oh, if I play my Inspired Inventor and get 3 energy, now suddenly I have like gotten more than a card's worth of value. So this is like better than 2 and a white 2/2 draw a card, right? That's not true, because you still need something to pay that off. You still need that last piece to sink energy into. So it's not saying that, it's raw energy is rawly worth this much in terms of card advantage, but saying that when you are paying the energy, you should like think about this like, Bespoke Battle Wagon, not very efficient, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's one of the few sources that are sort of reproducible. That's why it is on the slides, because that's one of the problem with this deck, is that it's a bit A plus B, and it's good that so many of those 36 cards contain both the way of getting the energy and spending it at the same time. Because if you separate those, you end up like Scry deck in Lord of the Rings, which you couldn't just win, because you drew A, they killed the B, you drew the B, they killed the A, and it never sort of worked. Right, then we have the second big theme, and that's modification. And just a reminder for you, modified means that a creature has either an equipment, an aura, you control, importantly, like pacifism doesn't count as a modification if your opponent casts pacifism on your creature, or counters. And here, weirdly, -1/-1 and +1/+1 counters both count as a modification, or any type of counter. I don't know, flying counter, trample counter, they all count as a modification. So everything that has a counter, aura, or an equipment is modified. And this is a big theme spanning Abzan things. It's mainly in green-white, and there's a spillover to B, because there's some, especially green-black is more like a counter synergy kind of deck. So we have 12 payoffs for modified, but only 3 of them are at common, which is not that much of a payoff. But one of the payoff of modification is that your creatures become better, so you don't really need to worry about specific modification payoffs on its own right. You can look at the as an extra bonus on top of having like really big solid creatures.
I mean, modification in the way that they've done it a lot in this set is like all the ways that they've done modification in this set are just inherently strong limited mechanics, right? Like bestow being it's bestow is a 2-for-1, and that like you get some effect from enchanting the creature, and then when the creature dies, like you get the bestowed creature as well. Living Weapon obviously gives you a creature up front, and then like you can move the equipment. We've seen that be very strong in call time. And then Adapt, you just get like a mana sink on your creature, and then like if you if you keep putting counters on it, like all of them are phrased such that like you'll just keep getting value. So it's all just like the synergies are mostly just gravy, and it's just like these are good cards.
Exactly. Bestow, just for the sake of people that are not ancient and didn't play with Bestow, like me. I never played
Like
with
me,
Bestow.
I didn't play with Bestow.
But Bestow,
Does that
you
make
can
me the oldest person here?
you can cast a creature for its Bestow cost, and then it sort of becomes an aura, with a slight difference that if this aura would go to the graveyard, it becomes a creature instead, which is good because if you cast an aura and opponent has a removal in response, your aura goes to the graveyard. In this case, even if they respond to you bestowing the creature on top of another creature and you kill the target, your thing comes in as a normal creature like it would into the battlefield. So it doesn't fizzle.
I don't think that's true.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure. Okay, I'm gonna look this up, but I think that what you're describing is true of Mutate. I think Bestow is the one where if the enchanted creature dies, then the bestowed creature falls onto the battlefield and exists.
Yeah, it does fall onto the battlefield.
But if you target with the bestowed creature, then like it gets fizzled if the target is removed in response. I will look this up though.
I thought that the wording was that
I think
if it would go to the
put it
if it would go to the graveyard for any reason.
I thought you put it onto the battlefield.
Okay, let's see. So, as a spell cast bestowed is put onto the stack, it becomes an aura enchantment and gains enchant creature. So you must just choose a legal target. As a bestowed,
yeah, it looks like you get like a special exception for bestow creatures.
Oh, okay, no. Okay, no, you were right. Okay. As a bestowed, aura spell begins resolving if its target is illegal, it ceases to be bestowed, and the effect making an aura spell ends. If it continues resolving as a creature spell. Okay, never mind. I was wrong. I had someone told me this. I thought that it works the way that you were saying, and then someone told me otherwise. So now I need to go have some words with that other person.
I based my knowledge of that on Reed Duke, because I had to refresh myself with all the mechanics in the set, and Reed wrote a good primer.
I have actually cast a bestowed spells before, so.
Ooh, oh, look who's back! Look who's back! Still on the hunt for food.
Okay, yeah. So, final verdict: either if the creature dies, whenever the creature dies,
yeah, it removes the problem that auras have, because even if they destroy your target, it still becomes the creature that it was, which is great because it makes it always a 2-for-1. You can play them in the open mana and not care that much, which is great.
It also makes like Glyph Elemental like a massive problem for your opponent because they have to kill the creature and then they have to kill the Glyph Elemental because it's still going to be big.
Yeah, exactly. Glyph Elemental is going to be problematic. Then we have equipments. Equipments are like they always are. Although in this set, some of the equipments are living weapon, which means that when you cast them, they come into play attached to a 0/0 germ. So they are sort of a natural creature, which means that every of those living weapon artifacts, equipments is going to give at least +X+1 because the germ is naturally a 0/0. So they need to modify the toughness at least of the creature involved in it. So they always do that. So I give an example here of Mandibular Kite. That's a 1 white for white mana, total cost of 1. For a living weapon, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has flying, and it has equipped 3 and a white. So basically, you cast it as a 1/1 flying man, and after flying man is useless, you can flip it onto something bigger and start attacking in the air with something bigger with +1/+1 on top of that, which I think is going to be a decent card actually, because if the format is aggressive, this is something you want.
Mm-hmm. You can also put like your bestow creatures onto the Mandibular Kite. Which, pretty strong.
Yeah, definitely. Because, you can put it on the germ, you mean?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, you put it on
Yeah.
the germ token. Yep. Like playing
Um,
Manipulate Kite into like Glyph Elemental on turn 2, like bestowed, is going to be like a problem for your opponent.
and
To
there's
be
like
fair, it is kind of slow, right? Because like if you play Kite turn 1 into Glyph Elemental turn 2, it will eventually be a big problem for your opponent. But still on turn 2, you're only swinging for 1, right? Because you didn't get the landfall, and like you don't get the base 2/2 from the Glyph Elemental, right?
yeah, no, you
That's-
get only +1/+1 for each counter. Maybe better to cast the elemental on turn 3, play a land, and then do something else. While on turn 2, you do something different. Then there's like a good 37-ish cards that have something to do with +1/+1 counters. And one example is Signature Slam, that both does something with modified and with +1/+1 counters. So it's a 3-mana instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then each modified creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So it's like clear shot on steroids.
Mhm.
Because it is a clear shot on the face of it. It gives +1/+1, and then you bite. But not only this, the +1/+1 stays forever, which is great. And also the clear shot, not only the creature you put a +1/+1 counter deals damage, but anything else that you have with equipment or with a bestow creature, with an aura, with another +1/+1 counter, with a -1/-1 counter, because why wouldn't you? Deals damage to the target that you've chosen. So it can actually kill something super big. And it's sort of like in the right deck, it's partially resistant to any kind of, even to the open mana. If they kill the creature in response, you might still be able to kill your target if you have other modified creatures on board. And another example of the card that uses this modification theme is Fetid Gargantua. That's a 5-mana 4/4. It has Adapt 2 for 3 mana. Adapt is the mechanic where if a creature doesn't have any +1/+1 counters on it, you can put the number specified of +1/+1 counters onto it. In this case, 2. So you can make a Fetid Gargantua from a 4/4 into a 6/6 for 3 mana. And it's at instant speed, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's an instant.
Yeah, and then this also has whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Fetid Gargantua, you may draw 2 cards. If you do, you lose 2 life. So it's like a play on the Gargantua that was the bigger Phyrexian Rager, basically, where you can draw 2, lose 2 life. But the nice thing about it is that you adapt it, you draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life. But later, maybe you can play like a 1-mana spell that puts a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can try to draw further 2 cards and lose further 2 life. And there are a couple of cards that have those abilities that when you put counters on something, you get an extra effect. And I think that's going to be a nice additional piece of synergy that you don't really need, but it's super neat when you have it. I think that especially there is the Eternal Witness variant where you put a counter, you can return a permanent from your graveyard to your hand by putting the +1/+1 counters. And then you have some of those spells that just dispose of +1/+1 counters quite easily that will allow for this kind of sort of like a grindy end game like we had in the black-green decks in OTJ, where you run out of steam, but then you put a couple of counters on something, you return a couple of permanents, which can put maybe more counters on something, and you start looping things, and it gets out of hand very quickly. So yeah, I think Modification, big theme in Abzan, and it looks like it's a mixture of aggressive and grindy, but I think like leaning on the aggressive side. And we have the last big theme of the set, and that's Eldrazi. Yeah, what are Eldrazi? I'm not a lore specialist. There's big things that came from somewhere. Probably they're like Cthulhu of Magic, I guess. The important thing that they have is they sort of live off lack of color. That's why the main mechanics of that are Devoid and colorless mana. And colorless mana, we use it, we know it, but actually when you come to play with it, it behaves very differently to what we're used to, because we are used to generic mana, and generic mana can be any mana, but colorless mana has to be specifically colorless. It has to have the colorless symbol, and only then you can pay a colorless cost. So for example, if you have a Glaring Fleshraker, it costs 2 and a colorless. It's a 2/2, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, create an 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature, add colorless mana to your mana pool. If you have like 2 forests and a mountain, you won't be able to cast that card because forests produce only green mana, mountain produces only red mana. You need specifically colorless mana, and there's not so many ways on the lands that will produce this colorless mana. So all those sources of colorless mana will be quite important for the decks that want to cast cheap Eldrazi at least. Because when you go to the like 9 mana costing Eldrazi, you will get those spawns, and you can sacrifice the spawns to get the colorless mana. That's not a problem. But cheap Eldrazi spells are not trivial to cast. And one example of land in this set that will produce this colorless mana is the landscape cycle, the cycle that Jason was talking about before. And it's basically like a Triumph version of Evolving Wilds. So it can only look for 3 types of basic land for each of the 10 landscapes that we're getting in the set. But it's not like Evolving Wilds that it only sucks to find lands. It actually can be kept on board and tapped for colorless mana if you want to. So it will be an interesting combination of in Eldrazi decks where sometimes you keep them on board because you need colorless mana, and sometimes you sacrifice them to find the basics because you need colored mana, and you have to balance that thing quite well. And also they have cycling for the irony for 3 different colors of mana. So what a combination! Who came up with this design? I love it. It's awkward, but I love it.
It's funny to me that you can like store these lands on the battlefield as like colorless sources until like the turn before you need the colored sources. Or like one example is the landfall bestow enchantment we were just talking about. Yeah. Like you can just like have all of these colorless lands on the battlefield, and then like on turn 6 go like play my 2-drop. Play my land, trigger, crack 4 lands, trigger it 4 times, have a 7/7.
As we said already with the Ether Revolt, you can for instance create the trigger of
you can revolt over like a bunch of turns with
exactly
special lands.
And there's a bunch of landfall things, not many, but there are some. So yeah, you can always find additional uses for that. And there's mana construction in this format is going to be an art form, I'm pretty sure, because there are double face lands, there is those sacrifice lands, there is colorless mana, there is colored mana. It's gonna be phenomenal to build mana bases in this format, and I'm pretty sure plenty of interesting data to talk about it. And there are things that will enable you. So we have the Snapping Void Craw. Eldrazi is focused in Timor colors, so specifically in green, blue, and green, red, because blue, red is actually more into the energy as an archetype, so you won't get a dedicated Eldrazi deck in those colors. But Snapping Void Craw is one of the common multicolor spells. We're going to be talking about them in a second, but this one taps for 2 colorless mana, or you can spend 3 and 1 colorless mana and tap it to draw a card. And I think that, early in the game, you've played on turn 3. On turn 4, you ramped yourself to 6 mana potentially, including 2 of it being colorless, which means that you will be able to cast those bigger Eldrazi things. Eldrazi are not exactly known for being petite in most cases. So, you are mana hungry. You want to cast 7 mana spells in those decks. And I think Snapping Void Craw is, if it survives a turn, going to be a great help in allowing you to cast those expensive spells. And then there are like payoffs. We have the Echoes of Eternity here, 3 colorless, and this 3 colorless mana and the cost is going to be quite a big achievement to get in this set. You got a Kindred enchantment that is Eldrazi on its own, and then if a triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So an ability of Glaring Fleshraker, which means whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent, will trigger twice. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, copy it, which if you manage to cast it, it's going to be very interesting, but probably very short game if you have something big. Okay, so yeah, only 10 spells in the whole set require colorless mana to cast. So they really didn't want to push that theme too strongly because probably they didn't want to burden the mana generation system too much, because in the end, you don't want to have a whole bunch of colorless lands flying around in the draft. But for many abilities, you need colorless mana. So this is like, in some decks, you will be able to cast a creature, but that creature does not reach its full potential if you don't have access to colorless mana, because sometimes they have a kicker, sometimes they have like alternative costs, sometimes they will have an ability cost that requires colorless mana. So all of this colorless mana is going to be quite important for you to get. And there's roughly 40 cards that create spawns or are capable of producing colorless mana in the set. So it's not a whole lot, but it's not nothing either. So yeah. Okay. And the last big picture theme is the double-faced cards. There is 25 of them, and 20 of them are lands. There are 10 monocolored lands, and they are very much like the cycle from Zendikar Rising of the mythic ones. They can come into play tapped, that's their default, or they can come into play untapped, but then you have to pay 3 life, which is a lot. But it's a good optionality to have. You treat them as a tap land, but in really stressful situation when you really need that 1 extra mana, you can pay 3 life, and it has to be worth it, I guess. That's the bottom line of it. And on the front side, they all have a spell. And I have to say that very interesting designs of those spells that are on the front side of those lands. For example, we have the Witch Enchanter. This Enchanter.
Witch Enchanter?
This Enchanter.
Witch Enchanter?
This Enchanter. It's a warlock, so it's an outlaw.
Yeah, could be relevant. You never know.
No outlaws in Modern Horizons. It's a 4-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. That's a very bad rate for that effect. I mean, you wouldn't want to play it in your deck. However, it is on the land. If 70% of the time you play it as a land, and 30% of the time you cast it as a Witch Enchanter, Disenchanter, you're quite happy with that, because your land converted into a spell that did something, and because you wanted to cast it, probably it did something quite good. Now the price is, of course, that the land comes into tapped, and it's going to be interesting how we are going to be balancing those effects with the power of the potentially turning your land into a spell. Now, back in the day, in Zendikar Rising, one of my first analysis that I did was looking at the benefits and drawbacks of double-faced lands, because Zendikar had that mechanic. And my conclusion was that you want to play them in your land slot most of the time. You don't want to put too many of those cards in your spell slots, because they are so much under rate that if you play 17 lands plus 3 double-faced lands, this means that you play a lot of the time 20 lands in your deck, which is probably something that you don't want to do. And if you treat them as spells, usually those spells are overcosted and not the kind of spells you want to be playing in your main deck. So you want to make sure that you err on the side of being closer to 17, maybe 18 lands plus MDFCs that you have in your deck from the Zendikar Rising experience. And I see, like, for some cards, it's definitely true also here. I mean, I wouldn't play Witch Enchanter in my main deck, and that therefore I will put it in my land slot most of the time when I'm building my decks. Any thoughts that you had from Zendikar Rising?
Yeah, so one really interesting thing about these is, so in Zendikar Rising, people started taking MDFCs really highly, right? And as the format went on, people stopped taking them as highly, the land, partially because, as you said, you kind of need to put them in your land slot, and then they're tapped monocolor lands, all of them, except the ones at Mythic, which are the bolt lands, which are still effectively tap lands for the most part. So it's a cost to your mana base to play them as well, right? But here we see something interesting, which is that there's these 10 dual colored tap lands on the back, Guild Gates or whatever. They're just a 2-color tap land on the back, which is a card that you actively pick for fixing anyways sometimes, right? And then on top of that, you get this super strong effect of having a spell on the front. I think that the 10 duels at uncommon will be very high picks. even without knowing what, like even without looking at what like all of them do on the front side, if they do anything meaningful, that's super premium, right? Just to like have that fixing and have that passive fixing, and also
they're
they
also
have the
hybrids, so
potential
they can be actually played in half wedges, even if they don't fix for your other color. Or maybe you do a splash or something. Like Strength of Harvest is an example here. It costs 2 and a hybrid Selesnya. It's an aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature and or enchantment you control. And it's mainly on theme for Selesnya decks, but I can see it being played in some kind of a white-black deck, for example. Maybe I'm splashing something white in that deck as well, but I want it mainly for being able to have green mana and a green spell that is a powerful aura for my modified synergies.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably at least heavily consider this if you were just playing in a white or a green deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I play like a red-white, go wide weenie, and then this becomes like my thing to push damage because I play it on my first striker or lifelinker or a flyer, and it becomes like a 7/7 all of a sudden, and that finishes the game.
Yeah, and then like the mono-colored ones are definitely less appealing because like look, I looked at what all of them did, and none of them look that good. Like, and there's nothing that looks like fine rate, right? All of them look like.
But that's why I said you play them
rate,
in
really.
you play them in your land slot, and you'll probably be happy about most of them because they are in the land slot. So if they will have to be like lands, 50 to 70% of the time. And then 30% is just gravy because you will might get some like effect that would be very specific, very time specific, game specific, but you have access to it if otherwise you would just have a basic in their spot.
Yeah, I mean, so that is true, but and I will preface this by saying I did not play very much CNR, but like and I did not participate in the MDFC discourse very much. But my impression is just that like, when you're considering that this is a card, when you're considering taking a card from a pack, this MDFC, right? It's a card that you're spending a pick on. Is going to be a mono-colored land that most of the time has to enter tap, and therefore, if you're using it as part of your mana base, technically makes your mana base worse. At being a mana base. And all of that for the privilege of sometimes casting a mediocre spell. Sometimes that is worth it. But even if it's worth it, it's not very often not worth very much, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very confident in that to take it. Like the monocolored ones definitely should not be like fairly high pick.
No. I think in my skeletons I put like between 1 and 2 of the monocolored ones, and I basically every single deck I put the dual one because they're just super good.
Yeah.
I think the one
and when I put 2, it was like, oh, 1 has a removal on it for 4 mana. That's good enough for me.
Like, I like the Falter land because Falter's usually pretty good off the top, and like if it's in your opening hand, you can just play it as a land, which kind of solves a lot of the problems with drawing a Falter in your opening hand.
Yeah. The ones that are the best are the ones that are definitely like, this is either really good or really bad. Like effects that don't have an in between, really, not just like mediocre always. So yeah, the Falter. I also really like the +2/+2 fight, right? Like sometimes a 3 mana +2/+2 fight is awkward, but like when it's really good, it's really good, and then when it's not, just play this land, right?
Yeah, Suppression Ray on this slide is like another good example. Like sometimes you're swinging for lethal, and sometimes you're playing it as a land because it was in your
Suppression Ray. Yeah, I mean I put those 4 on specifically because I think that they're quite masterpiecey examples of design. Especially like Rush of Inspiration and Suppression Ray are one of the few cards in the set that use energy but don't produce it. And I found that putting them on lands is particularly insightful because you don't want to put those kind of effects on cards that don't have any other utility, because then sometimes they will be dead in your hand when you don't have enough energy available in your pool. However, if you manage to accumulate some energy and you cast Rush of Inspiration, then it just becomes instant speed draw to cards. It's great. And you save yourself the discarded random, which is actually punishing for that. And Suppression Rate the same. If you have some leftover energy, you can actually get extra value. And Glasswing Grace is sort of like enabling the Absent synergies because it will be probably much better card in white-green, being an aura and everything. But but you can't do that because it costs double white if you want to, because of the hybrid cost. And Drowler of Truth, again, it's a 7 mana creature that is not particularly great. It's like a 7/6, roughly vanilla. But those blue-green decks will have several things that trigger when you cast a creature that costs 7 or more. And this fulfills that criterion very easily while being on the land. So it lets you play one of those things that you don't want to be playing too many of in your deck, while still having it technically in your land slot.
This solves like the opening hand problem of like playing a 7-drop, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are the Planeswalkers. They are at Mythic, so let's not spend too much time on them. But they are creatures on one side, and then you can flip them and they become a Planeswalker. I mean, probably they're going to be good. Some of them.
Yeah, probably. I mean, like, the 2 mana 1/2 plus 2/1 is good just for being a 2 mana 1/2 plus a 2/1, so.
Yeah. And then when a 2/1 dies, you get an Ajani.
Yeah.
And you can bump all your cats, of which you have 0, which is
Herbivore. The answer is that's just how they designed them.
Yeah, just because.
All right, mana fixing. That's your specialty. But I think that this set has much less of it than it used to.
Oh boy, you missed an important card.
What did I miss, Jason?
You missed the card. Let me find this. What's it called? Path of Annihilation. My favorite card. Almost certainly going to be one of my favorite cards for the set.
Is that the 4 mana devoid and artifact or enchantment?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it does make Eldrazi tap for any mana, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yes. It's the 4-mana enchantment that says like Eldrazi you control have tap out a mana of any color, and ETB make 2 scions. So notably, like it's just 2 mana dorks on a body that fix for any color. And that's just
and makes
strong.
You gain 4 life every time you cast a 7-drop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Also that, yes, that is also
which is actually an important ability, because those decks will fall behind on life by ramping in the early turns, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, I did forget that one. You're right.
Something about me and non-creature spells that cause my creatures to tap for mana of any color.
It's just Insidious Roots all over again, isn't it?
I think you mean Relic of Legends. But...
Oh yeah, that's a good shout.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Path of Annihilation is the new Relic of Progenitus.
No, Legends.
It's kind of like explosive vegetation kind of thing, except I think it'll be a lot
explosive
better.
vegetation, except you get 2 0/1s.
Yep, which makes it a lot better, I think. And
you
also,
you can tap them and then sack them.
Yeah, you can. It's true.
That's also true. Yes, if you cast Path of Annihilation, the next turn you have theoretically access to 9 mana.
Yep.
No Kozilek.
And I mean, if you curve like a Glimpse the Impossible into it, you have like an insane amount of mana. And you can just tap those Scions the turn you play it. So you can play another 3-drop.
Yep. It makes a lot of mana.
It does.
But that's more ramp than fixing.
No, I mean, I think that's very relevant fixing. Like you just get so much colored mana. You just that one card just fixes your mana forever, as long as.
But
you have
what do you want to? My main problem is, what do you want to fix for? I think that this set is so synergistic around the edges that it's really hard to find things that I would like to.
I have a couple skeletons. Don't worry.
I'm glad that you really mean, because I can see decks within wedges that have the overarching synergy themes, but I don't feel like splashing energy into my Eldrazi deck or splashing modified creatures into my energy decks or something.
Oh, I have something. I have something cooking. Don't worry.
I really hope it's not Allure and Shrieking Drake combo. Because I've done it back in the day, and I know how it works. Having said that, we have a couple of common fixers. One of them is the Nightshade Dryad. That's 2 mana 1/2 Death Toucher. It can tap for colorless or tap for mana of any color, which basically makes it fixing for all 6 colors present in the set. There is the Snapping Void Crow, which taps for 2 colorless, which is sort of splashing for the colorless synergies. That makes it, firmly in the Eldrazi camp, because not only does it need the colorless mana, but it's also the combination of cards that have the most expensive mana costs, which I guess is important, because you don't want to play this card when everything that you have costs like 2 mana. I mean, what's the point then? Because the colorless doesn't get you far. And there's Solar Transformer, which is a mana rock at uncommon, but it does cost 2 mana, which makes me hopeful that it might actually be playable in some cases. It enters the battlefield tapped, gives you some energy when it ETBs, and it can tap for colorless, or you can pay energy and tap it for mana of any color. So if you need colored mana, you have to pay energy, but you get the colorless mana whenever you want, which is decent, I guess, in those decks that require colorless mana. And the last one that I showed here is the Planar Genesis, which is not exactly fixing, but it's a ramps with selection a bit. So green and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them into the battlefield tapped. If you don't, put a card from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So if you need a land, you get a land within the 4 cards. Later in the game, when you don't need the land, you can just basically have it being an impulse, which is a neat modality, I guess. But yeah, I think that 5-color decks will be harder to build in this format than they were in OTJ. OTJ had much more fixing and also much more incentives of being a 5-color format, because bombs were atrocious and splashing them was a way of life.
That's true.
Now, fixing in lands is actually great, because if those landscapes are at the same rarity as all the other commons, then we have probably one of the better fixings for 3-color.
Do we know the collation?
I don't know the collation yet, unfortunately. I assume that they're going to be in the common slot.
I assume so too. They say C, right? It's not
Yes.
L. Yeah, that usually means common.
But sometimes they have like weird things. Yeah.
Yeah.
If Mike Provencher, which I trust with their judgment, tells that it's they should be the same about common duels in Dominaria United, which means 2.1 copies, because the common rarities has changed. 2.1 copies of each of them per pod, which means per pod you get 21 of those triumphs. It's a lot of triumphs.
Yeah.
You can 3-color decks will be relatively trivial to make if that's the case.
That means your average 2-color deck is going to have really good mana as well.
Because then you also have like a 1 copy of each of the duels per pod. They will be high picks, but you want them if you see them.
So I will note that this is actually... So there's a lot of different ways that lands promote splashing, right? So in the past, I remember there was a Double Masters or something like that. They made Cryptic Spires, and the designers talked a lot about how like Cryptic Spires as a card, which is basically it's a tapped duel that you get to choose the colors for during deck building. That's a card that really incentivizes exactly 3-color decks, right? Because
and this is exactly the same, yeah.
Well, I would argue differently, actually. So like having Cryptic Spires means that you're incentivized to use all your, like, you always get the perfect dual lands. So then that's enough to build 3 colors, but like disincentivizes you from going further. Whereas this is the kind of fixing that actually I think incentivizes a bit more like splashing, because specifically if you play a fully 3-color deck, sometimes you'll run into issues where, even if you have your 1 fetch land, right? Let's say you draw your opening hand in your teamer deck, right? And you draw like your teamer fetch land and 2 forests. If you're a fully 3-color deck, that does not cast all of your spells, right? That only casts either it definitely casts your green spells and only casts either your blue spells or your red spells, right? So naturally, a fetch mana base like this incentivizes you to have splashes, like light splashes, in like still main 2 colors splashing a third, but like consistently splashing a third in all your decks instead of having like streamlined 2 color. Because like if you, when you just like randomly want to be playing this land that fetches a forest and an island, but also could fetch a mountain, like why not just include that mountain, right? And similarly, like you might want to sometimes splash into a 4th color because of this, but that's sketchier. So I think that this is not exactly incentivizing true 3 color, certainly not as much as Cryptic Spires did, but it is incentivizing something more akin to splashing.
So more like Evolving Wilds kind of splashes than like
I have to say my experience of Streets of New Capenna was very different from most people's experience of Streets of New Capenna. But in Streets of New Capenna we had similar lands. You might be aware of their existence. They sacrifice and bring a basic.
I wonder where in Constructed one could have seen this.
They do gain 1 life somehow.
They do gain 1.
Yeah, I thought you might have seen them. And for me, this encouraged full-blown 3-color decks most of the time, but I wanted to have like 5 of those fetch lands in my deck.
So the difference is that Streets of New Capenna had only 5 3-color pair, 3-color combinations, right? And therefore, like when you weren't just getting like these random random like tri-lands that weren't in your color, and you also had those like fixers at common that were like pay 2, make a land like rainbow land for this 3-color combination, right?
And the lands that sacrifice to draw cards.
Streets of New Capenna had a lot more ability to I think to play a focused 3-color deck, and this is notably worse than that.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, so many of them. If you play 3 colors, you have 8 of them. No, I mean
you have 4
per pod. Yeah. So
sorry.
Yeah. So around 8 copies of them per pod. So you can probably squeeze out 4 of them, and with the 4 of them, you can get roughly to a 9/9/9 mana base.
The problem is that like inherently an Evolving Wilds that can only get 2 out of your 3 colors is kind of not great, right? Like it's worse than a 2-color, like a Guild Gate, right? Because like you have to choose. So it's.
Keep in mind, it does tap for colorless if you need.
Yes,
it.
And in fact, I would argue that tapping for colorless makes it more. It gives you more incentive to try to make things only a splash, not full 3 colors. Because if your full 3 colors, you're less likely to be able to use that colorless mana.
That's true, unless of course you're in Timur, which I think Timur will be playing like a larger amount of those lands just because they want actually a colorless land.
That's good.
Giving grades to all the lands in the set, I put the Timur land like a bit above the other ones for that reason.
Makes absolute sense
to its archetype.
Yeah, but it brings us to the point that it's going to be super interesting to build mana bases in this set, because you'll get those things plus the double-faced spells and balancing out how many lands you want to have actually in your deck, because these ones stay in your deck. If you have like 3, like 1 doesn't change much, but if you have 3 copies, that changes quite a lot in how your deck is being built. Then you have the spell lands, so you want to maybe have a bit more access to land than normally. So maybe 18 is the sort of default if you have a couple of the double-faced ones. It's going to be pretty interesting to build, and I'm really happy to run the data on that once we get the data. But it's going to be pretty interesting in the first days to figure out how those mana bases are going to have to be built. All right. Hey, especially adding the double-faced cards, like that's exactly what I said. And yeah, as I said, I would err on 18 rather than on 16 in this particular format. As a sort of like, before we start playing, that would be my advice, that if you have a doubt, probably stay closer to 18 lands in the deck. And I count the DFCs as lands for the purpose, so don't count them as spells most of the time. An important thing that was at least true in the Zendikar Rising is that best of one hand smoothing doesn't count DFCs as lands.
Oh.
Which doesn't change much. It increases the variance of the kinds of hands you'll be getting a bit. Because let's say that you have, hypothetical situation, 9 lands in your deck and 9 DFCs that are lands on the backside. Your hand will be half smooth. So the 50% of those 9 lands will be smooth and 50% will not be smooth. So because of that, you get a slightly bigger variance. You get sort of hybrid situation between hand smoothing and the normal draws. So you'll get more of those hands with 1 land, more of those hands with 4 or 5 lands than you would get in a normal hand smoothing situation. That's something that you might want to know. Oh yeah, and there's the fetch lands. They're good. Now this is something you put, Springbok, the gold cards.
I mean, I just wanted to talk really quickly about, the gold cards at common. They kind of give you some archetype like signposts, and most are not really that splashable. Like a lot of them are 2 or 3 mana. Like I guess Writhing Chrysalis is the most splashable. So you can kind of get rewarded for finding your lane by, getting a bunch of gold commons nobody else wants. And, the fixing is pretty abundant, so you can probably cast these early.
Yeah, I think that they're all pretty powerful, actually, when you look at it. And, Chrysalis maybe is splashable, but why the hell would you want to splash an Eldrazi-specific card in anything else than maybe green-blue?
Hey, I mean, Chrysalis is like actually kind of sick, right? Like,
it's a 4/5.
It's a 4/5 for 2 mana, essentially.
It's anywhere between a 2/3 that makes 2/0/1s that like you can bank mana to a 4/5, right? Like,
yeah, like I mean, I think Chrysalis is the most splashable of the gold commons, but like. And I don't think people are going to be in a rush to splash like Faithful Watchdog, for example. So
no.
If you get it like in the back of the pack, you can be like, okay,
or Sneaky Snacker for that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, none of those cards look remotely close to being splashable anywhere because they are also so synergy heavy, and the synergies are so localized. I mean, I guess you can imagine a Jeskai deck that has Riddlegate Gargoyle, but that will be predominantly a Zorius deck that has some red.
Hey, you could put Sneaky Snacker in like a red deck that like will discard it or like rummage it away and then draw a bunch of cards and put it into play from the graveyard.
Yeah, but why? Well, you can attack with Sneaky Snacker and after attack sacrifice it to draw 2 cards and bring it back.
Yep, that's I may have put that in the deck shell. Yeah,
I might have. Yeah. I divided them, by the way, into the allied colors, and the other half of them are enemy colors. I don't know if there is any kind of differences between how synergistic the color pairs are based on that in the format, but I thought it would be interesting. Here we have the other half of them. And yeah, they also look super synergistic. The Golgari Ooze is +1/+1 counters. Conduit Goblin is energy aggro. Cyclops Superconductor is like conducive to spells. Obstinate Gargoyle is the white black classic grindy archetype. When I want to sacrifice it, it comes back as a flyer. And Snapping Void Claw is a mana dork for Eldrazi, which is great. I mean, they're super synergistic, all those cards.
Yep.
Okay. That's another of your creations, Springbok. The big picture of the color, and I fully endorse those conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, like the white commons kind of generally point towards like an aggressive, color pair. There's like a couple cards that make energy, but like there's a lot of like cheap aggressive cards and like airy. I can't see this card name. The 3/3 flyer that puts like a +1/+1 counter on 2 creatures really wants you to play like your curve to be very low so you can get in and get the ETB value. And there's a lot of flyers. There's a lot of cheap ways to get opposing blockers out of the way.
Yep.
White seems to be pretty aggressive generally.
Well, yeah, I mean, look at it. Thraben Charm is like a big card for how you want to be playing. I guess that you want to be like 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and then Trade and Charm 3-drop, and then game over basically at that stage.
Yeah, like you can pretty consistently like double spell with like a 2-drop and like a cheap removal spell on turn 4.
Or also like Hexgold Slit, a card that when it connects a couple of times becomes unblockable for the rest of the game because it just grows with every connection it makes. And if they have a 2/2 blocker, you can give it first strike to make sure that it connects once. Then you can remove something, and all of a sudden this thing becomes completely unblockable. Or you can put a bestow creatures on top of it, and all of a sudden it becomes too big to block again, and you can get energy from somewhere else and give it first strike again. So this is the sort of Hexgold Slit. I see it as the equivalent of the Trained Arix for this set in terms of how aggressively damage pushing it's going to be. Again, and a good target for putting another counter from the 3/3 flyer that puts counters on things because it has the support.
And I mean, like, Nyxborn Unicorn is another really good. Like, if your curve starts with like a Mandibular Kite and you play a Nyxborn Unicorn, you're like starting to push like a lot of damage. And then like, you know, the 3/3 that puts counters, you know, putting that on a Nyxborn Unicorn can really like grow a lot of your creatures.
And if you draw it late, you just bestow it because it costs 4 mana to bestow, and then you make something like, I don't know, a 5/5 with Mentor, which is great.
Yeah, one nice thing about how white aggression looks this set is that it looks like there's a lot of resiliency built into it, right? A lot of ways, like when we were talking about the modified stuff, I was saying like, oh yeah, you know, bestow, living weapon, adapt are all, you know, cards that give you a lot of value and like able to contend in the late, an ability to contend in the late game, right? And so yeah, we're seeing that here with things like Nyxborn Unicorn, Mandibular Kite, just like giving you more ways to push through damage and compete with larger creatures in the late game, even as your like 2-drops get slightly outclassed.
Yeah, the proverbial reach that it gives you and so many cards in here. And by reach, I don't mean the mechanic, the ability to close the games. What do you think about Dog Umbra?
Dog Umbra is like a pretty interesting design. You can like use it as like a protection spell, or you can use it as a pacifism. Like
the flash on it is pretty nice.
Yes, like you can flash it on end step, and if your opponent like made some attacks thinking they had a creature that they were going to block with, you know, you can kind of get them as well.
Yeah, I'm still, you know, it's still a pacifism, which makes me
right. I mean, like you
mad on it, but
yeah, it doesn't blank abilities.
Yeah, it doesn't blank abilities. That's true.
Well,
I think it's very much a card you play in like an aggressive white deck because, you know, you care more about getting the power and toughness off the board, and the game is less likely to go long.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, so what do you have for us in blue?
Well, I put the energy producing cards off to the side because I feel like, you know, Tempest Harvester is probably generically good, but you really want these cards in like an energy kind of deck.
Oh, I have a hot take. Here. I think Ether Spike is generically good.
Yeah, I think that is probably also true. Because Quench is, you know, has been pretty good generally, but
well, so my argument is that like a lot of times when Quench is good, like your opponent, a lot of times is
unless
your
you can fix the presentation, out, right? I'm not interested in your presence here. Oh, finally, IT support arrived.
Anyways, so my argument for Ether Spike is that a lot of times, you know, your opponent taps out for a spell and then you ether and then you know quench it, right? And you just counter the spell and you've just traded 1 for 1, right? But with Ether Spike, it's better than that. If they tap out for a spell and you counter it, you don't just trade 1 for 1. You also get an energy at the end of that, right? Like
that's true.
You like keep an energy left over, and that makes your next Ether Spike better. That makes your next Ether Spike into a lava, not Lava Axe, Mana Leak. Imagine if it could be a Lava Axe, but yeah, like it's just the kind of card that like I think scales really well going into the late game. Like it makes it just feels really easy to use it as a as just counterspell.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably gonna be good, but there are like a lot of cast triggers that this doesn't actually stop.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like
a little bit.
yeah, I think that definitely the weirdest thing is going to be Eldrazi Scions, not the casters. Like if your opponent just has random Scions laying around, that makes Aether Spike worse by a lot. But
Yep. And then like the cards I put in like generically good, like I put Serum Visionary and Demon Fury there because like I'm not really a believer in like that the blue-black draw archetype is going to be that good, and I think that you just kind of want these cards like generically. Kind of same with the Unfathomable Truths. Like I look at it and I see kind of like Fake Court. Fake Court was awesome, and I think this is also going to be pretty good.
I think Demon Fear looks absolutely broken if you manage to cast it for 1 mana, and I don't think it's going to be that difficult to cast it for 1 mana.
No, I don't think so. There's like the extension of the Sneaky Snacker combo that we mentioned was you Sneaky Snacker on turn 2, you on turn 3 sack it to the 2 mana draw card thing, you get it back, and then you Demon Fury for 1 mana and you put their 2 drop back.
Yeah, ouch.
Which is kind of a beating.
Yeah, it's absolutely beating.
And then the arrow here from like Unfathomable Truths is because like you can also like it also is a good card in like the colorless decks. Like you can cast it off your Sage of the Unknowable, and like. But I also do think that Unfathomable Truths is like going to be a pretty generally desirable card. And like Sage of the Unknowable is like a card that you're going to want specifically if you're in the colorless decks.
Yeah, the Unfathomable Truths is also like a perfect card that you can easily splash into your mana hungry, say, green-red deck.
Green-red, yeah.
Because the fact that it costs 1 blue is that's a bargain. We don't see that frequently, that this effect costs only 1 blue. On the other hand, we don't see many colorless spells that cost 1 blue, but right. Shall I scroll down to the next slide?
Yeah.
We have black.
Yeah, I mean, like black looks like a pretty grindy color to me. Like lots of things that make like multiple bodies, or like things like little grindy stuff. Is like the grind them out like section. Like Draw's Claw is like an equipment that comes with the body. Like Refurbished Familiar is like Hollow Marauder Light kind of thing. You're probably supposed to sack things, draw cards, like get like a bunch of incremental card advantage. At least with like that section of commons. And then there's like sorry, you saying something?
Oh no, just I said the familiar looks like my favorite version of Ravenous Rats ever, because it only costs 1 mana.
It looks awesome, and it's got flying.
And if they don't discard a card, you get to draw a card, and it has a 2nd point of power.
But I think that every Ravenous Rats from now on should have this buyout clause that if they cannot discard, you draw.
Yeah.
Because there was always a pain with the card that you draw it late and it's nothing, and if you draw a card, then all of a sudden becomes busted.
It feels like a Hollow Marauder Light kind of card.
Yeah, like, every Ravenous Rat should just be Hollow Marauder. Just reprint that in every set from now on.
Excellent.
I know, right?
Excellent suggestion.
And then there's like some counter synergy cards like the Gargantua and the Vampire. Although I think the Vampire is like pretty generically desirable. And then like we've got like 2, like Wither and Bloom is definitely going to be a great removal spell. I'm not quite sure about Breathe Your Last. Kind of feels like Murder with like a very slight upside. Might gain you like 1 life on average. So
yeah,
it'll probably be okay, I guess.
If it will gain you 2 life quite frequently. There's 10 common creature spells that are multicolor. Oh, okay, 8 technically, because 2 of them are devoid. But the life gain in those controlling decks has been always like very important, because they will often go to the late game just on 2 low life totals, and because of that they lose even though they stabilize.
True.
So I wouldn't discount it. And there is not so much good removal, and there are mighty big creatures in this set. So I'm looking forward to Breathe Your Last as a solid one-off in my black decks.
Yeah, it might be
non-aggressive ones. I don't care for it in my aggressive decks. In my aggressive decks, I want Wither and Bloom.
Yeah. I mean, Wither and Bloom seems like a card that like almost anybody who's like even slightly considering playing black is going to want to take very highly.
So what is going to be next? Lore and Hold? Or silver
Lauren Holt.
and quill?
It's a divination, and it's a divination with a tap and stun on the flashback.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a pretty fun card, actually.
Okay.
Except that that's not white red.
Neither was Lorehold.
That's true.
Okay, let's scroll to red.
So yeah, I mean, red. There's like kind of a collection of like aggressive cards. Like this combat trick with split second seems like pretty solid. It pushes like a fair amount of damage. And then there's like Molten Gatekeeper and like Glimpse the Impossible as like kind of an interesting way to deal a bunch of damage. And then I think like this section of like red removal and Skoa are going to be pretty generically good. And then they
look pretty good.
And then it wasn't like space on this slide for it, but red also has like a bunch of like kind of below rate energy producers, like the 3/2 for 4 with flying that makes 3 energy, and like the axe, which like I'm not like that interested in playing, but you know, I guess if you need energy cards, those are there.
Yeah, I think I guess that red is going to be in 2 flavors. Artifact aggro and go wide artifact aggro.
Yeah.
No, okay. I disagree with that. I think that red has some good cheap removal that makes it play at some interesting things.
It could, but you know what happens to cheap removal usually? It's being used by aggro to push more damage. Because you can cast a 2-drop and kill something. Excellent.
But yeah, something like Void Pouncer looks like a great 2-drop that I think a lot of decks will like. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think that with this one, you definitely want to have access to some amount of colorless because you want to have the Skizix kind of version of it more often than not. In the late game, at least.
For sure.
How do you find there's a 1/3 menace that gives you some energy, and whenever it attacks, you can spend 1 energy to give something +1/+0 and menace?
I thought that was fine. I think that will do a lot better in like black red because you have the cranial ram.
No, that's exactly what I'm thinking. But
otherwise, not a huge fan. Maybe if you need like some critical massive energy payoffs, like this can be like your 23rd card, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't push damage that well itself.
It's mostly weird. It's like the stat line is kind of mediocre.
Yep.
Yeah, you put an axe on it.
Okay, the place that I could see it is like you just want a defensive body that gains you some energy when it ETBs, and you just don't use its ability very often.
Exactly. And then
here we have green.
Yeah, so like there's like, you know, green has like a bunch of different things going on. There's like some counters stuff, there's like some Scion's ramp stuff, and there's like some beef, and then you know, Horrific Assault is probably going to be just like a really important like removal spell. And like, but green also has like some bridges between these things. Like Brasking Brood-Scale is like both a counters thing and also like a Scion's ramp thing. And like Nyxborn Hydra is like a counters thing and then also like some beef. So there's like some, you know, like some cards that do like fill multiple roles in your deck.
Green is a bit conflicted in what it tries to do because there is this big theme of Eldrazi, but also there's a big theme of counters, and I'm not convinced if there is enough of it in terms of like, can you support both things well?
Like Basking Brood-Scale is probably going to be in demand because it goes in both kinds of green decks,
and it's important for both.
And it's pretty important for both, yeah.
Root Purposer must pull its weight because
I mean, it does seem pretty strong to me. You know,
it does. I mean, it's a Courser that ramps. I mean, what's not there to like?
You get one when it dies too, which is kind of nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Scions do seem pretty strong for casting these large creature spells.
Yep.
We're getting them at pretty strong rates.
And yet, like things like Tusker are really good for that because you can always cycle them. And I don't know if there is any kind of potential reanimator deck that could use them, but
there's Victimize at uncommon, so you can do some things. If you Malevolent Rumble on turn 2, you can then sack the Eldrazi to your Victimize on turn 3, and maybe just, you know, Like
Get back to huge things.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, now I can go to this, present, share screen, the deck. Okay, walk me through that.
All right, so basically this is like a blue-white control deck. The idea is to turbo your way through to casting a Decree of Justice for a very large amount. So I put a lot of card draw, like interaction, couple MDFCs, lots of cheap interaction, ways to draw more cards, cheap spells.
And you basically only kill with the Decree of Justice.
Yeah, that's the idea. I guess I also have like a 2/1.
Only one copy of Tameo Story Circle, whatever it's called.
It's an uncommon, so I can only have one.
But you don't have this full loop. You gotta loop it.
I know, right? Well,
you can if you want. We can put another copy.
I mean, I would rather probably have another copy of Decree of Justice than another Tameo's Story Circle. But
oh well, I knew that feeding the cat was a problem because that means that the dog now, who was dead asleep, and cannot find the ball when I throw it 2 meters from him, all of a sudden through sleep can sense that there's cat food on the table.
How close is Tameo Wheat's Story Circle to the Bat Song? I think it's like a fair amount worse, but
yeah, but it's cheaper by 2 mana.
It does cost notably 2 mana and not a lot of mana.
Yeah, like you have to spend like 2 mana to draw the cards it gives you. So
I know.
Which is,
It is definitely. It's a different card, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. This one's essentially playing like 18 lands, and it's just got like a bunch of interaction cards that draw more cards, and eventually you'll just Decree of Justice for a large amount. And if that doesn't work, you can cast Tameo and shuffle it back in and try it again. And then there's like a sweeper.
I'm super interested if this kind of build is viable. It would be great if it is.
Yeah, I mean, it looks fun, if nothing else.
Yeah, because I did the most boring version of just like put flying creatures and some interaction, and hopefully you will kill with flying creatures, and that's about it. But this one looks spicy, and actually, when you look at it, it looks feasible.
Yeah, I don't think there's going to be a lot of competition for like Expel the Unworthy, right? So you should be able to hopefully get the density of cheap interaction that.
At Pro Tour level, maybe not, but on Arena, I'm pretty sure that the 2 mana removal spell is going to be still quite highly picked. Unfortunately, because it shouldn't. Yeah.
I see that you have the Brainstorm Shuffle combo here.
Yeah, that's the. I mean, I wanted cards that draw more cards, right? I think it's like pretty good here actually too. Like I'm sure you understand. Like the point is to just try to get to Decree of Justice. I think
the Brainstorm Shuffle combo is Brain Search, which is a 3 mana version of Brainstorm, but that draws 4 cards, and then you shuffle 2 of them back. And of course, that means you draw 4 cards, you shuffle 2 back, and then you crack your fetch land and shuffle, and the 2 disappear somewhere. In my case, they come back to the top, because why wouldn't they? But I'm sure that some of you will be much more fortunate about it.
Shuffle bug.
Yeah,
there's like a bug on MTGO, if I recall right, where they would just like stay on top or something.
Oh yeah.
So do I have you on record saying that you are a shuffler truther?
No. It's not the shuffler. It's a personal bias of the software makers against me specifically. It works for everyone else, not for me.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like I do.
It's called the what's the word? Entitlement truther.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, somebody on the programming team hates you specifically.
Exactly.
But like, I do think this deck might, struggle with like the ramp decks. But I think it probably has like the game to handle like like a kind of cheaper, like aggressive deck, because it does have a lot of like cheap interaction.
Yeah, it is true. There's a couple of interaction spells that are absolutely awful in this deck. Not in this build, but I mean in white and blue in general. But there's plenty of the ones. There is the Oblivion Ring for energy for 1 mana.
Yeah,
that you have to pay. It's a great card if you play tempo aggro, but it's a terrible card if you want to play super long grindy deck that eventually casts 1 spell and hopefully wins with that.
Yeah. But this was fun, so we'll see. It
does look fun. Yeah, I mean, 2 Decrease and 2 Tamiyo meets the Story Circle, I think makes this deck much Definitely. More Sam Black version. And I'm pretty sure you're going to be, maybe not the 2 Decrease, but I think Tamiyo meets the Story Circle is something that you're going to be quite reliably be able to get 2 of if there are 2 open in your pod.
Yeah. That is unfortunately like the best way to actually get a Decree of Justice back. Like the return target instants or sorcery are like in red, and I kind of didn't really want to be playing like a double red card.
Okay, let's move to the next one. I'll stop sharing this one.
I'm gonna have some spice about Tamiyo. That means the Story Circle in a bit, but
so I'm going to put my Dimir Tempo right now, and then we can move to your Blink, whatever this thing is. Okay, I need to present. So many things. So yeah, I mean, I basically went for the Sneaky Snacker combo. It does have 2 Sneaky Snackers, things that come back from the graveyard to the battlefield if you drew 3 cards in a turn.
Mm-hmm.
When you draw your 3rd card for the turn. So this requires to draw 2 extra cards on your turn apart from the first one. So I have things like Deep Analysis, Fetid Gargantua that can draw 2 cards if I want to. It has the Horrid Shadow Spinner creature that draws 2 cards and then you discard 2 cards whenever you attack with it. So that fulfills the criterion of drawing 3 cards. It has the Eviscerator's Insight, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So you can actually, post-combat, after you attack with the Sneaky Snacker, sacrifice it, draw 2 cards, and then you draw your 3rd card for the turn. They come back tapped, which is exactly what would happen if they would attack anyway. So you got basically 2 cards for free. And I think that's a neat combo. And it has 2 Demon Inferior, so it really leans on this draw 3 card synergies for this particular deck. The idea is that you have some removal, some card draw, card selection. You have the Mindless Conscription, which I think actually can be playable in this deck because it's an enchantment, costs 3 mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, or whenever you draw your 3rd card each turn, you amass zombies 3. So it's a 3 mana 3/3 on face value, and sometimes when you draw 3 cards a turn, it will either become a new 3/3 if that one died, or becomes a 6/6 if it's still on the battlefield, or whatever, 9/9. So I think that this can be like a neat combo with the Horrid Shadow Spinner. So you attack with the Horrid Shadow Spinner, you have the 3/3 amass zombie attacking, it becomes a 6/6 neat combo. There is also cards that allow you to sacrifice the Sneaky Snacker to other effects like Lethal Throwdown. You sacrifice it, kill something, and then you can return it if you draw cards later on that turn for some reason. For example, you cast Deep Analysis or something. And also I put the card Kami of the Jealous Thirst because I think you will have infinite amount of access to those cards. It's a 1/3 Death Toucher, which is not terrible. 3 mana is a bit overrated. And for 5 mana, you can drain the opponent for 2. The shtick with it is that if you drew 3 cards that turn, you can use that ability for 0 mana. You can only use it once a turn. It would be a bit too busted if you could use it unlimited times for 0 mana.
Yes. Cast Divination, you die.
Yay!
Win the game.
But I think that it's a relevant thing to do in this deck because there are so many ways that you can draw 3 cards a turn. Relatively easy when you have that type of a build. So yeah. And as a rare, I put a Psychic Frog because I thought that Psychic Frog would fit very neatly into these particular set of cards. I have 1 Gravedigg if I need to return some of my things. And grind a bit. I have Wither and Bloom to maybe kill something and put counters on my Sneaky Snackers if I need to speed up my clock and stop with Dirtling. But of course, my primary plan is to Dirtle. There is the Fell the Profane, the removal that is also a land, because I will draw so many cards in this deck that I will be definitely capable of casting those things. And Waterlogged Teachings, another thing that I can cast instead of playing it as a land, but also it's a very good land if I need to. And I can get one of my removal spells or Brain Surge or Deep Analysis out of my deck using it if I need to. So yeah, basically the idea is that it's a aggro tempo deck where I'm hoping that no one will exile my Sneaky Snackers, because if they don't exile it, I'm going to keep bringing them back until they do their job. And the removal should keep me alive long enough, and maybe those drains from the cameo of Jealous Thirst will do enough of a job and clog the board on the ground sufficiently for me to survive. And I think Mindless Conscription is a non-trivial part of that deck, because I don't think that anyone else apart from you will be interested in drafting those, because the 3 mana 3/3, again, not interesting enough, but a recurable 3 mana 3/3 or a potential 3 mana 6/6 for a low opportunity cost is not a terrible thing.
If you sack the amass zombie on a turn, you know you're gonna amass again to like a lethal throwdown or something, you do get to draw a card off the throwdown. So
yeah, that's true. And if I sacrifice the 3/3 zombie to Eviscerator's Insight after I attack, I basically give it vigilance.
Yeah, you get another one. Yeah,
And it's like you cast what's it called? Charter Course.
Yeah,
that's true. It's
true.
a Charter Course, black version, unless I flashed it back.
Yeah,
Charter Corpse.
Oh, that's a good one. I like
nice one.
So I think my version of the deck had Serum Visionaries in instead of the Community of Jealous Thirsts, and because it had those,
it's a better card. I don't get me wrong, it is a better card. I just went full in on the synergies because some of my skeletons, I build them like, how would they look like if I go all ham on the synergies? And I'm pretty sure that it's actually smarter to put the Visionaries, because they are just really much better.
I'm not convinced that Visionary is a better card, because one of the things you really want when you're doing a lot of card drawing is some way to convert that card drawing into some sort of tempo, right? And Kami really lets you do that, right? You already have a lot of ways to draw cards. You don't need more ways to draw cards, right? Visionary is great because it, is a 2-for-1. It accelerates you through your deck, but you already have plenty of that. You don't need more of that. I feel like Kami makes a bit more sense to me.
My slight issue with the Visionary was that it never gets me to drawing 3 cards that easily. So I focused on putting all the cards that will let me draw 2 cards at the same time, except for the Psychic Frog. But Psychic Frog is just powerful.
Yeah, the reason I put Serum Visionary in was so that I could put a Twisted Riddle Keeper in, which is the 8 mana emerge creature. That's a 5/5 that lets you tap 2 things and put 2 stun counters on them. And Serum Visionaries are pretty good things to stack to that. And I felt like that was just a nice combo.
Sneaky Snackers are not bad either if you can get them back for that. That's actually a good thing that the Emerge does work in those decks. And obviously, every single deck that I built...
Yeah, just had 3 lands. Same for me.
I think except for White-Red, where I really wanted to make sure that I have all gas and I start casting my creatures turn 1 already.
I kind of actually feel that White-Red does want the Devoid lands, because you're probably going to be playing a couple copies of Void Pouncer in them.
Perhaps.
So...
But I think I didn't put the Void Pouncer for that reason. Okay. I removed this. Let's go to Jason's Blink. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Is that okay with? Are we ready? Oh, wow.
I'm excited.
Well, are you ready?
I'm not. I see it now, and I'm not.
I categorize this under green white because like I don't know. Mostly it's one specific white card that I think can be
before we go into the sharing of the screen, I will tell you they categorized it as a green white deck because it has 4 white spells, one of them being land, 3 red spells, and sort of 2 green spells. But okay, let's go with that.
So okay, to be clear, this is not laid out like a deck. This is laid out in a very specific way. Okay, so the specific thing from this is there are 2 cards that are blink cards in this set. Distinguished Conjurer, which lets you pay 5 to blink. It's like a Soul Sister that also lets you pay 5 to blink once per turn. Something. And then more relevantly, the thing I'm more interested in, Essence Reliquary, which is a 3-mana do-nothing artifact, which is a great start, of course. That lets you just, on your turn, at instant speed, tap it to return another target permanent you control to its owner's hand, including all the auras attached to it. So naturally, what you can do with that is reset your ETBs, right? Like you can. So a card I include here was Rose Cotton Knight, which is the 5-mana 3/4 vigilance that goes looking in your top 6 cards for an artifact or enchantment, because that both finds your Essence Reliquary and finds some of the other like really good blink targets. So that's like any creature with an ETB effect, you can pick it up, replay it. There's not that many.
When you said Essence Reliquary doesn't do anything, I think you're absolutely wrong in there. It reduces the cost of your Ravenous Rats by 1.
Oh yeah, you're
that's
correct.
True. And then you can pick up your Ravenous Rats.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't include the Ravenous Rats here, but just because I didn't want to include every single like creature with an ETB here, right? But yes, the Ravenous Rats is one of the better things to reset, especially since, like you said, like Affinity. So some things I wanted to highlight. MDFCs. Notably, it says permanent. You can pick up your MDFCs with your Essence Reliquary after you've already played them as lands. So this just like theoretically in the late game could let you like draw spells off of your mana base, which can be powerful, right? So that's another use of it. I wanted to note. There's some good blink targets. Amped Raptors, pretty good. Just like getting I just wanted to highlight some like pretty good like tempo blink targets. Like Amped Raptor just gets you like another spell cast. Skoa Ember Mage is just another 4 damage. It's very expensive. It costs 6, right? But so one amusing thing you can do with Skoa Ember Mage is if you have multiple, you can like kind of like play one, blink the other, like discard one to Grandeur. You can do stuff. Like Mike points out in chat, you can rebuy landfall triggers. Specifically, I put a Cursed Marauder here because that's the one in the black for a 2/1 ETB edict both players, right? Specifically because like I couldn't figure out exactly where you want this card. It doesn't seem that good of a rate. But if you have an Essence Reliquary and you have if let's say you have an empty board, no creatures or no non-token creatures, right? You cast your Accursed Marauder, and then in response to the ETB trigger, you pick your Marauder up. Now you don't have to sack any creatures. You've just like edicted your opponent for free, basically, and you get to do this every turn. So this is a very interesting interaction I wanted to know because it is quite unique. So there's that. There's
better. You can have a board full of tokens.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a bunch of token makers. Speaking of that, that's the next column. Like, there's a lot of these. Spawn Gang, Commander, Scurry of Gremlins. There's a lot of things that like make 2 tokens on either cast or ETB. Both of those work for the purposes of Essence Reliquary. Though the other one, which is worse, the Conjurer, only can blink creatures and doesn't get the cast trigger on those creatures. So yeah, Reliquary is definitely the card you really want here. then I really wanted to highlight Path of Annihilation, especially because it's a card that both gives you more tokens to like chump with and like do stuff with, and also makes you mana so that you can keep running this engine, right? So like I think that Essence, Reliquary, and Path go very well together, and it's part of why I categorize this as green white, right? And on top of that. The last thing I wanted to note was sagas. Notably, when a saga gets to its third chapter, or final chapter, I guess, the final ability, saga ability, will be put on the stack. But while the ability is still on the stack, the saga still stays on the battlefield. Only after the final ability resolves does the saga get sacrificed, or like not sacrificed. Does the saga go to the graveyard, right? So let's say you play this the Hunger Tide Rises, right? 1, 2, 3, you make 1/1. You make some 1/1s, and then on the fourth one, you put that trigger on the stack, and then in response to it, pick up your saga. You'll still get the full chapter 4 effect, but you'll have the saga back in your hand to replay that turn. So this lets you just like loop a saga over and over again, retelling the same story. And what better saga to loop than the one that I didn't actually include in here, but the one that loops your deck as well. With Tamiyo Meets the Story Circle, you can just continually give your opponent's creatures -2/-0 every single turn. They can never attack you.
I like that. I should have.
Yeah.
I should have considered considered putting it in my blue-white control deck, but I was like a little tight on uncommons. This is cool.
There's no such thing as being tight on uncommons, because if you put 9, no one will notice. That's fine. And I think that we should really ramp up this number to 10, given how many uncommons are there in the current sets.
Definitely.
Those skeletons were built for draft boosters, not for play boosters.
Yeah, I think that it's worth changing. Yeah.
Yeah, but like the basic thing I wanted to point out is there's actually quite a lot of things you can do with Essence Reliquary in the set. I have no idea whether it's worth doing yet, but
I mean, whoa. Let's step back here. And of course, it's worth doing it. The question is if it's gem positive is a different question altogether.
Oh, no. When I say worth, I mean EV wise.
Yeah.
Of course, it's fun to do it.
Yeah, no, this looks wild.
I mean, this was pretty cool.
So yeah, if you're wondering why Jason is on those streams, that's the exact reason. The insanity that ensues when we actually open their builds. I will use that word very liberally.
Yeah, I warned you. This is not a skeleton. This is not even a half skeleton. This is a skeleton of a half skeleton.
This is an idea. Yeah, you're selling ideas.
Yep,
I'm selling dreams. Dreams. Maybe
a dream of looping stuff. And if there is something that limited players hate, is the selling of a dream of looping things infinitely and accruing value on a minuscule scale.
I'll bring this straight to Sam Black. I'm sure Sam already knows.
I'm sure, yeah.
Sam
he probably looked at Essence Reliquary and was like, "Wow, that's
just the cheaper. What's the shard? The blue artifact that did
Crystal
for 1 mana. Yeah, exactly. That's just cheaper crystal shard. Of course, it's busted.
Well, okay. I mean, crystal shard is also good because it also can bounce your opponent's things.
Yep.
Yeah, but whoever used it for that?
I mean, it prevents your opponent from ever tapping out for a creature, which is
exactly.
Insane.
Okay, that's fine. They pay 1 mana more for everything.
Sometimes it prevents them from ever tapping almost tap, because if they leave 1 mana open, you do it on their end step and do it on your main phase to bounce something.
Exactly. Yeah.
I still don't remember me ever using it on opponent's creatures. Why would you do that?
I've never cast a card Crystal Shard in my life, by the way.
Oh. Wow.
You heard it first. Right, let's move to the next one.
Boosters, which is
let's
fun.
move to the next one, and that will be your version of Affinity.
Oh, man, I'm not confident in this one. I've never actually played a format where Affinity was a draftable deck. So I kind of just...
I would say put artifacts and it should be fine.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I did. But I put every shitty artifact in.
That's the way. And I played the Frogmite era. God, in a time when artifacts were also lands, that was so busted.
Yep.
Okay, so here we have the deck. Is it visible? Yeah.
Yep.
So, Serpadian Simulacrum. I think that looks like a pretty solid card, actually. Because does 2 damage early and then turns into a removal.
I think in like Affinity decks in particular, you really do want to have that 1-drop artifact so you can actually start like playing your stuff at like a reasonable point in time, and getting your like missing the 1-drop versus not missing the 1-drop seems pretty important.
Yeah, this card also. I mean, am I crazy to think that it's actually good in multiple archetypes? The 1 mana 1/1, you can for 4 mana return it to the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it. So it's like a super annoying recursive threat. It's not the Skeleton of Yore that is just a 1/1 forever and does nothing. This one actually can pack a punch later in the game. It is modified. It has some.
Also,
synergies.
your thing about like creature powers, like a 3/3 seems pretty like it's still going to remain pretty relevant even later on there, because there aren't a lot of like four greater like toughness creatures generally.
There is the Scary Terry Affinity version. The Ethereum Terramander, 1 black for a flying 1/1. It can only block creatures with flying, and it has adapt 4 for 7 mana, but it is discounted for each artifact you control. So usually you will pay like probably 3 mana in those kind of decks to make it into a 5/5 flyer.
This is a good thing to put a Cranial Ram on,
I see you put 2 Dross Claws.
I mean, again, artifact density of cheap plays. Like this is what you got. Like,
So that's the equipment that is a living weapon. So it makes a 0/0 germ, and it gives +1/+1. And whenever the equipped creature attacks, each opponent loses 1 life. There's equip for, is it 2 or 3?
2, I think.
Yeah. So it's 2 mana 1/1 that attacks for extra damage, or always attacks for 1 damage if you manage, and then later in the game we can put it on some evasive threat to make it slightly bigger it's basically +2/+1 on the offense.
Like I really wish Drossclaw had 2 power, but I think if it gave +2/+2, they would have to make it like cost like a ton more.
Oh yeah, no, it would have to be. There's the Marionette Apprentice, 2 mana 1/2, and it has Fabricate 1, so you can make a servo with it.
I think you're probably always making a servo with it.
In this deck, yeah. I'm pretty sure. I guess if you have it in the +1/+1 black-green counters, you can make it into a 3/4 quite regularly.
Yeah, you can.
And then whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So another sort of like nickel and dime reach kind of mechanic. So I guess that your build is more like my initial turns, I try to do as much damage as possible, and then I have some ways of dealing the last couple of points of damage through the Marionette Apprentice, through the Drossclaw.
Through the Falter, the Falter that's on the land.
There is the Falter on the land.
Like
Pyretic Rebirth, that's a card that looks super powerful.
Yep, I think that also goes phase. So, or does it? No, it doesn't go phase.
No, okay. Creature or Planeswalker. No, but it's a 4 mana instant. You return target artifact or creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and it deals damage equal to that card's mana value to up to 1 target creature or Planeswalker. And returning something like Refurbished Familiar that on paper costs 4 mana, but in your deck will frequently cost 1 mana. On turn 5, you can just return it, deal 4 to something, and still cast your Ravenous Rats. That is a 2/1 flyer, which is not a terrible combination. You had Fanged Flames and Galvanic Discharge as your cheap removal package. You do play the Smelted Charbag, the card I was talking about, the 1/3 Menace creature that gives you some energy and has Menace and can give something else Menace.
And is also an artifact. Cranial Ram.
And is also, Obviously, you have 2 Cranial Rams. That's probably the star of the show. It's basically a cranial plating that comes with a germ attached to it and gives +X+1, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So it frequently will give like +4, +5.
That's a pretty large bonus on like the like evasive creatures that this deck can,
Exactly, like even putting it on your refurbished familiar that is a 2/1 flyer. That's going to pack quite a huge punch.
Yeah.
And I see you put the Furnace Hellkite. That's the 5 and red dragon, uncommon. It has affinity for artifacts, and it's basically a Shivan dragon that sometimes will cost you 2 mana to cast. And the Frogmere Enforcer. That's a Frogmite mixed up with
Frogmite plus Mirror Enforcer.
Yeah. So it's a 7 mana 4/4 with affinity for artifacts, or it's a 3 and a red 2/2 with affinity for artifacts. So yeah, again, 1 mana 2/2 or 0 mana 4/4 sometimes.
Yeah, like
what else is there? The Argban Condor. That's the thing I didn't put in my deck, but I should have. It looks pretty busted in those decks. 4 mana 3/3 flyer with modular. So when it dies, you can put the counters on another artifact, and whenever another artifact enters the battlefield, it gives -1/-1 until end of turn to something. So I think it's also important because so many of the flying creatures you will be facing are going to be 2/1s. And killing those out of the way is going to make it attack. And you put the affinity rare demon. That's 6 and Rakdos for a 5/5 with like a bunch of abilities, but importantly,
that thing is a good way to finish the game. Like you can throw like Mirror Enforcer at their face. It's a lot of damage.
It is a lot of damage, and a bunch of landscape lands. Notably,
and then,
you didn't put the duel, but
no, because I feel like this deck was too the duel could probably go in here, but again, like a lot of the payoffs for this thing are uncommon, and I wanted to highlight the affinity things in particular. And like I would rather have, I think, the Falter just because it actually can probably just win the game.
That is
Bloodstoked Insight probably doesn't win you the game like a lot of the time you cast it here.
That's very true. And
pro tip. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go.
I was just saying. Pro tip: don't try to destroy target untapped fetch land with your Falter.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. They sack it and it fizzles, right? That's yeah.
Ow!
Thanks for pointing that out. That would have been bad.
I'm sure it will happen.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Sorry.
I think overall, this deck kind of has a bit of a problem in that the 2-drop artifacts seem a little bit weak on their own. So you might just need a lot of uncommon and a lot of the artifact 1-mana plays are all uncommons. So you might just need to open the nuts uncommons, get a lot of the nuts 1-drop artifacts passed to you. So
okay, I'm going to go with my Selesnya because that's the kind of intellectual capacity I possess currently. I can build an aggro green-white deck.
I was pretty excited by this. I thought it was fun.
The Selesnya?
Yeah, I like casting Watch Wolf.
Oh, wait, I have a combo with Watch Wolf. Okay, but I have to find the right file. That's going to be the one. Yeah.
The very first Magic card I ever saw was Watch Wolf, actually.
I have. So my proposition for this deck is the one of the better curve outs, but one of the many, as we already highlighted in this stream, is the Faithful Watchdog into putting Trickster Elk on top of the Faithful Watchdog.
Yeah,
and slamming for 6.
Yeah, I did that. Except my goal was to put it on the Mandibular Kite instead.
Well, there you go. On Faithful Watchdog, obviously, Faithful Watchdog is a 0/0, so when it becomes an elk, it becomes a 6/6. So, I have to add Jason. Okay.
Sorry, my browser keeps crashing.
Yeah, literally the very first Magic card.
I think that turn 2 Watchdog into turn 3 Trickster as Elk on top of the Watchdog makes you a hasty 6/6 that dies into a 3/3, and that's going to be pretty hard to negotiate for lots of decks, especially the ones that try to dirtle. And I don't think it's going to be that difficult to assemble if green-white is open. Apart from the obvious combo of that, the deck has a lot of 2-drops that are good 2-drops, unlike the artifact ones as we discussed. Because Watchdog is great. It's a 3/3 vigilant creature for 2 mana. The Unicorn is decent, although not perfect in this deck. But if you have things like Mandible Kite or any kind of 1/1s that are playable on turn 1, Unicorn becomes much better. But this is more like a 2-drop that you want to play as a 2-drop if you don't have anything else to do. But if you have anything else to do, you want to do anything else, like Hexgold Slit is a perfect play on turn 2, because that thing also, if it's unopposed, it will run away with the game very quickly. It grows every time it connects, and it can get first strike, so it can be unblockable for that first hit, turning it to a 3/2. You have like Glyph Elemental, which is something that is going to grow quite a lot if you don't do anything with it, and you can obviously put it as a bestow creature, and then later it turns into an instantly big thing. Basking Brute Scale is another thing that you can play on turn 2, because just a 2-mana 2/2, you can grow it later in the game, so that's all fine. Then you have a couple of things that can go for the late game. If you are into the racing kind of scenarios, I think that Envoy of the Ancestors is pretty good. It's a 3-mana 2/3 that gives every modified creature you control lifelink. So you're going to win most of the races if you manage to connect with that on board once. And it can basically grow also itself as the game progresses. So you can get a bit of more grindy late game kind of thing. I put the Inspired Inventor just to showcase that it can be also in those modified decks. There's the Golden Tape Trainer. This thing, when you put something on top of it, is becoming pretty good pretty quick, because whenever it attacks, all your creatures, all your aura spells cost less when you have it based on its power, and when it attacks, modified creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the power of it. So if you make it into a 3/5, that's a big boost that you get on your modified creatures, if you can get them. I have 2 Temperamental Oozwags as a sort of top end plus finisher plus thing that lets your really big modified creatures push through, because it gives all the things with counters and all the modified things trample. And not much of the spells. I do have 2 of them in the land slot, in the Bridgeworks Battle, which is the +2/+2 and fight, the sort of Savage Smash card, but on the land. And Strength of the Harvest, which is an aura, so it helps your modified theme. And the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature and or enchantment you control, so it can make something evasive really, or something with trample really big. There's the Mandibular Kite, which I think is a great addition to the those kind of decks, because it gives you that extra reach, deals a couple of damage early, works fine with the Nyxborn Unicorn, because you can not only you can grow the germ to be a 1/1, but then you can move the Mandibular Kite somewhere else, and then still you can mentor the germ even further. And Wing It, I think, is a very important card in there. 2 mana for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Put a flying counter on it, and you scry 1. I think that's a really good rate for that kind of combat trick. And this is a combat trick that you probably frequently will cast before combat, just to give something flying and push absurd amounts of damage. I think that how cheaply it's priced. We had that effect in Ikoria when it was back recently, and this cost 3 mana. And didn't scry, so that's a pretty good rate on that compared to what we got this effect for before. And I have Traben Charm as my removal of choice, with the Signature Slam as another removal. And I did put Ajani Fells the Godsire, because I thought the last chapter of that, when you have a couple of evasive big threats, giving double strike to them is going to be good, and it can clear out the board for you as your last thing that you're going to cast, for example.
Yeah, I think the main differences between mine and this is that I put metastatic Evangel in because like I felt like the proliferate would matter like a lot enough that it was probably worth like giving up an uncommon slot for it.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I drafted a lot in Draft Sim, and Metastatic Evangel was the card that I was getting into the counters in white green through. So I basically was picking that, and I was yeah, that's the path I'm going to do. I didn't put it, but it could easily be there, easily.
And then for like the land slot, like I think for white decks that plan on attacking, it's going to be difficult for me to not put like Suppression Ray in like as a land slot because it as like a double face card because it's also essentially falter on a land.
That's the blue-white land.
Yeah.
Sleep, kind of.
Yeah, but available for mono white decks as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the white decks are pretty interested in attacking with, and especially in like this deck, which tends to kind of go tall. Like, you know, like I think Suppression Field can really do some work here.
Oh yeah, totally. I didn't put it in this build, but Suppression Field I think is exactly for those kind of decks.
Definitely a pretty desirable white common, I think. Just like pretty generically.
For the aggressive decks that want to get job done, and to get the job done, sometimes you need to cast a 3-drop and a 1 mana removal, and then you're golden. Yeah.
I do feel like the one card I want more of here is like more Dog Umbra. It just feels to me that like you want a bit, like I just want a bit more ways to like push through large blockers, like especially if there's big Eldrazi, and like it also just makes your creatures modified, right? If they weren't already, like you could flash it in as a trick in some sense. Like if you have a big unmodified creature with like Brushwag in play or something, like the Brushwag itself not adapted, you could theoretically like flash it in and be like, ha, surprise trample or surprise lifelink with the envoy. I don't know like what else could matter.
I like that it also protects your creature that you presumably put like a bunch of investment into, you know, making bigger.
I have the Sylvan Safekeeper for my protection. Yay. I honestly was looking through the rares and I didn't find anything that would be like, oh, I would love to put it because of the synergy with the counter theme. So I thought, yeah, Sylvan Safekeeper is actually not a terrible rare to put in the deck because you don't need that many lands after a certain stage and you can just sacrifice to make sure that your things are indestructible.
I mean, Kudo is actually kind of interesting with the counters because like some of your creatures have like less than 2 base power, so he can make them like bigger.
Oh yeah, the bear. The Bear Lord. Yeah, that's another option. Well, Bear Lord with Watchdog is another good combo.
Also with like Living Weapon.
Also
with Living Weapon. Like
then you can re-equip and it's still a 2/2.
Yep.
Yeah, the bear is going to be interesting to build a deck around it because the bear, if you don't know, makes all the creatures into 2/2s.
Oh yeah, I have a layers question actually. If I play Mandibular Kite and then put the elk on the germ token, does it still have +1/+1 in flying?
Sorry.
Layers.
Like so, Mandibular Kite, right? So if I cast this, there's like a Trickster's Elk like makes the creature lose all abilities and then have like base power and toughness 3/3 when you bestow it. So if I put the Trickster's Elk on the germ token from the Mandibular Kite, it's just a 3/3, right?
So your question is that there's a germ token that attached to a Mandibular Kite, and also an elk that attached later on. And your question is, what is its power and toughness, and also what abilities it has, if any?
Is it a 3/3 or a 4/4?
Essentially, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so it is a 4/4 first of all, because so first the layers go in effect of like first it's set as a 0/0 by characteristic defining abilities, and then power and toughness setting applies first, and then the +1/+1 still applies. So it is a 4/4, and the and in terms of abilities, effects that where is this? So ability adding and ability removing effects are both in the same layer, and so things go in timestamp order. So I believe it's the elk says like loses all abilities, right? That's how it's worded.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so I believe it is a 4/4 that has no abilities. It cannot fly.
Oh,
wow, that's not something I even considered. Okay, thanks for explaining.
But I believe if you
re-equip it, then it will become flying.
I'm not. I need to look up equipment for this. Because equipment might be weird.
It might be checking like every turn or whatever. I don't think so though. It sounds legit what you did, but also like
no. Yeah. It is in fact like even if you unequip if you move the kite and then move the kite back, I'm pretty sure it still would not have flying because the timestamp is checking the timestamp of the kite itself versus the elk.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. I'll move to the next archetype in between, which
Thanks for the explanation. That was pretty helpful. Thanks.
Draw 3 plus removal, Jason. Does it tell you anything?
I imagine it's got blue cards in it.
So okay,
blue red. Yeah, it's an Izzet deck. At this time,
so
it basically
my take is that the draw 3 in blue is a very strong card. You know, Into the Fate Court comparisons. You know, it's instant speed, which is very good. It doesn't cost blue, which means it's splashable, which is very good. It's something that explicitly is worth a mana, as opposed to like the 1/1 flyer that like was implicitly worth some amount of mana because of bargain, but like you couldn't always take advantage of that. And so like, you know, the draw 3 is a form is like is some amount of card advantage and ramp and like, you know, fairly good rate if you count it as costing only 4 mana because of, you know, net 4 mana. That's pretty good, right? So
is
it's a
this
very
the
powerful
Imperial
effect.
Oath of the set?
Not exactly. That's something different. But like, basically, what I'm saying is that like this card, Unfathomable Truths, represents like a very strong effect at common, like a very unique thing that you can do in this format, and because of it, like you want to be able to take it. You want to figure out how to take advantage of that, right? And how you take advantage of that is having cheap stuff that affects the board and cheap removals, basically. And red has a lot of that with Galvanic Discharge and Fanged Flames. You know. Galvanic Discharge being a 1 mana deal 3, roughly, and Fanged Flames being a 2 mana deal 4. Those are both pretty good. On top of that, you just have like, Ether Spike here has like another way to interact pretty cheaply, especially at instant speed. Deem Inferior also honorable mention as something. If you have a mana left after you cast your draw 3, it costs only 1 mana, by definition. And there's just like a lot of things that you can do. Like this deck is like very much not fully built out because like the rest of it, just put whatever in it, right? Like I put a bit of focus on energy because of Galvanic Discharge being an energy and Ether Spike both having energy, and I wanted to like put it with some color pair. But you don't have to do this. Like you could splash the red. You could like, you know, just go wild. Just like the idea is just to have like you can play this powerful draw 3 with like cheap removal to trade 1 for 1, and there's just come up on that exchange, right?
Yep.
So that's the idea behind this, basically.
So how good do you think like a card like Phyrexian Ironworks can be?
Well,
I mean,
if your Phyrexian Ironworks makes... So first of all, if your Phyrexian Ironworks makes a 3/3 immediately, that's pretty good, right? And if it it's because then it probably will make another 3/3. So that's kind of the goal, and I think it can be pretty good. I just want some sort of energy async for these, like some cheap efficient energy sync for like when you're firing off discharges on like X2s or whatever, and you have excess energy, and then like Tune the Narrative, Ether Spike can maybe give you that. I'm still not sure exactly what things look like Like I would need to play it out to see like exactly how often you're ending up with excess energy, exactly what kind of energy sink you want for this deck. But you probably want something. Right.
So
the tuning narratives also certainly are not load bearing here. Like those are kind of whatever. Yeah.
So all of these
Tune the
cards are
narrative
in
is great.
my Is It deck, so we could maybe talk about like maybe like a bit more fleshed out version. Just like because I was trying to essentially make like Aether Revolt work, so you can at least like try and see if that's like a feasible with like this combination of cards.
Yeah, no, like I agree that you can definitely, like make an energy deck, and I assume that's what you're doing with your blue deck. I mostly here the energy stuff is secondary. I just wanted to point out specifically, draw 3. You want to maximize that with cheap removal, and the way to do that is mostly in red. That's specifically why I wanted to point out with this.
Yeah, because of the discharge and flames, and Spike really is
And Spike.
good in using the leftovers of the discharge, or great in generating extras for the discharge in the future. So that's like a natural thing. Would you see that also working in, I don't know, like
I guess green
black?
has like a 1 mana interaction spell as well.
Yeah, you could do this in like. You could do this in whatever colors as long as you have the cheap interaction. You could do this in blue-white with the 2 mana sorcery speed exile thing, right? The red just has like the most efficient stuff. Also, like you can splash the red stuff. You can splash the cheap interaction. That's completely fine. And like I can see this in blue-green. I have a blue-green deck. I think that's labeled as ramp. But like you could use like the mana dork in order to fix and ramp you to like these unfathomable truths, and like let you cast your galvanic discharges easily. There's a lot of things you can do.
All right. Well, I mean, the important takeaway home message is that the unfathomable truths are the key sort of like fueling of that deck, because you will need to draw multiple cards a turn in order to not fall behind, because you're not probably doing as powerful things as some other decks will be doing. So you need to draw more cards. And that's like quite a classic way of playing those kind of blue decks that run out of steam. You need to top up occasionally.
I mean, just cast Decree of Justice. Problem solved.
That's one way of looking at it. Okay, so do you want to go with your white-black Springbok?
Yeah, we could do that. I'm like not that confident, just because I don't think the color is that good.
I don't think that. Yeah, I was also struggling with building like a coherent version of it. But
how long has it been since we've had a coherent version of white-black?
Well, the point is that white-black was good in the end in the OTJ. It's just very hard to figure it out on the first go.
I don't think I still feel like white-black did not end up being particularly coherent. Let's say like it could be good because like there were good cards, but like it didn't feel particularly coherent. You
got the sacrifice the link breaker to get the mercenary to get the value. That was beautiful.
I mean, I think also just like Lawbringer carried like your white-black deck pretty hard in OTJ.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, like Lawbringer is a really good card, yes, but like that's more a card than a deck,
Yeah, exactly.
Baron was good. I always killed it when I played it. But that's a sign of a good card if they have to kill it.
That's true.
Okay, so what do we have here? You went for the 1-drops.
Yeah, I did. I also went for like the cheap. I went for like the cheap modified creatures kind of strategy, and tried to like get some counters and proliferate, kind of going. And like I'm not really sure this is actually that good.
So you got the vampire with lifelink that can grow. You got the marauder, because I assume that the plan is that you're going to have some expendable 1 mana creature that you can sacrifice, like Indebted Spirit.
Right, or like a germ.
And they have to sacrifice a big thing.
Yeah.
Well, you can't sacrifice Germ because Germ is a token,
right.
and that's a non-token thing. So that's.
I mean, I have Obstinate Gargoyles.
Gargoyles, they're good. So Obstinate Gargoyle, for those of you that don't know the spoiler yet by heart, shame. 1 white, black for a 2/2, and it has flying as long as it's modified. So you can either put counters on it and make it with 4/4 flyer, but it also has persist. So when it dies, it comes back with a -1/-1 counter. And as I mentioned earlier, -1/-1 counter counts as modification. So it basically dies into a 1/1 flyer, which makes it a weird version of Preening Champion. Also, weirdly, if you put a +1/+1 counter on it later, the -1/-1 counter disappears and it becomes to being a 2/2.
There aren't. I don't see any like repeated ways of doing that. Obviously, there are like one-shot ways, like exiling your Wither and Bloom.
But like there is the land.
The land.
The one
you can like
move counters.
Yeah.
Oh sure, but that's really involved, right? Like you have to have another thing that also can repeatedly get counters, so that you can like.
Well, yeah, adapt creatures. Hello.
Yeah, no, I'm aware of adapt. It's just like is a lot of mana to build your indestructible 2/2 flyer or 2/2 not flyer.
But you have the path to whatever. That makes so much mana.
I mean, technically, you can move the -1/-1 counter onto your opponent's things because Nesting Grounds says target permanent.
Yes, that's better. Okay. I didn't realize that Nesting Grounds could move to your opponent's stuff.
Yeah, I didn't either, but it's like funny at least. I should have.
No, I think that's legitimately good.
I put it in my black green because I thought some of the dirtly stuff can be nice with the.
Maybe
Witness.
I think Nesting Grounds might be legitimate with the Gargoyle actually.
But I didn't come with the Gargoyle synergy. That's
the thing is, Nesting Grounds is only as a sorcery though. So like, you if you like chump with your Gargoyle, you can't actually like threaten to trade with any X3 because it's only as a sorcery, right? If it weren't as a sorcery, you could just like move the -1/-1 counter after damage and be like, ha, your creature's now dead. But you can like chump with your thing and slowly shrink their board. It's just like the Gargoyle. I feel like you need to be doing a bit more with the Gargoyle itself.
I mean, it's still a good creature on rate. I mean, it's a 2/2 that dies into a 1/1 flyer.
It's a 2/2 with Afterlife 1, right?
Yeah.
Is that good, right?
I think it's enough for a common. Yeah.
Well, okay, like to be clear, in like a non-MH3 set, right? Like 2 mana 2/1 Vigilance Afterlife 1 was like a decent card, right? That was a decent common. Now we're in an MH Modern Horizon set, and it costs 1 more mana, and it has 1 more half this, but it doesn't have Vigilance, whatever. Like that does feel distinctly worse. I don't know. I'm just not excited about 3 mana 2/2 Afterlife 1. I think you need to get more value out of it somehow.
That's fair. Nesting Grounds though was pretty cool though. I like that.
Yeah. Like the nice thing is if you put +1/+1 counters on it, you keep getting more instances of its stuff. But yeah,
I mean, if you curve like it into Air Auxiliary, it is
also there is the upside that the other cards didn't have. That if you put if it's a 2/2 and you put a single +1/+1 counter on it, it all of a sudden becomes a 3/3 flyer, which is pretty good, or a bestow creature or whatever.
Or you put Drawsclaw on it, it swings for 4.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
so there is this upside that it has that the Afterlife creatures don't really have, because the fact that it has flying when it's modified is a big change, because counters are quite cheap to get in this set, it seems.
Like, I think this is kind of like a weird deck. I think it just there aren't enough like. You need like multiple Eviscerators Insights or something for like the Gargoyle to feel like it's like doing that much if you're gonna actually try to sacrifice it. So I think you probably need to lean more into like trying to make it like into a threat that comes back.
Yeah, I mean maybe there's some like we'll let Jason figure out the loops with the Accursed Marauder, Obstinate Gargoyle, and the land moving the -1/-1 counters.
That is pretty sick, though. That's a nice synergy.
And okay, you get the. I think that this card looks pretty powerful, and if their archetype is going to be good, I think it's going to be on the back of this thing.
Yeah,
both halves of that look pretty strong.
True. I think also this is probably a deck that wants Inspired Inventor, but like I guess I would probably take out like some of the more mediocre 2-mana cards for it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be decent because it has good removal. It has decent creatures, but it's going to take a bit more time to figure out how to build the Orzhov, as always it does. Because it's not like a straightforward aggro. It will require some kind of a grindy, synergy-based approach, and that usually doesn't come on day one.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's progress because the time is passing.
Oh yeah, I don't have to go 30. Somebody else.
We had the Is It Energy. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to go for my Golgari? Question mark. So yeah, pretty straightforward. It has some removal. So we have the Wither and Bloom that's just custom made for that, for Wither Bloom.
In Wither Bloom, no less.
Yeah, exactly. Horrific Assault is another cheap kind of removal spell. I want the removal to be cheap. I didn't manage to squeeze in one Murder because it might be useful. Signature Slam is also too good to pass. So I put those. And then I have like a combination of counter synergies and some kind of grindy potential. Oh, I put Ophiomancer into my grindy part because that's a great way of getting value. So I have Grave Digs to get back my creatures that I want to trade. I do have small creatures that can grow, which will present my opponent with opportunities to kill them so I can recur them later. There is the Evolution Witness, which also I can put counters on it and make it grow. Now I'm realizing I don't have the land in here, so I must have put it in some other kind of archetype. Maybe I actually did put it in the white-black. The land that moves counters between things. There is the Hydra Trainer and the Oozewag to sort of give you some kind of reach in the later game because maybe your small things are not good. I also put the Sentry. That's a 4-mana, 2/3 menace, which doesn't sound like much, but it does connive on ETB, and it does connive whenever you attack with it. So it can actually be much bigger than it is on face value, and it gives you some card selection. And I thought that that's enough to make that card good. When I have the Cursed Wombat, the signpost for green-black, obviously it gets 2 counters from each connive trigger that makes counters, which makes it much better. What else do we have? The Basking Brute Scale. I put Dreadmobile. I don't know if that card is going to be good, but it has some sacrifice kind of synergies. Maybe that's actually better in the white-black when I could sacrifice quite a lot of stuff.
I guess you can actually sacrifice Obstinate Gargoyle and then move the counter on the Dreadmobile back onto the Obstinate Gargoyle, so it becomes a 2/2 again. Wow, spicy technology.
I mean, here I can, yeah.
Gotta love spinning some wheels to do a whole lot of nothing.
This is the life. This one, it doesn't really spin too much wheels. It has 2 drops and 3 drops, and it should kill with those things and cheap interaction to finish off the game. I don't think it's super fancy, but I think that the capability of the extra grind is pretty useful. One card that I didn't put, but maybe I could have, is the Gargantua that allows me to draw 2 cards. I think in this deck it's particularly useful. I have Gift of the Viper is one-off a combat trick that puts a +1/+1 counter, a reach counter, and a death touch counter on target creature and tap it. So we are back to a secret reach. because it's secret, because you can't see it before attacks. It appears in the middle of the attacks while you might be tapped out. And I think that this card might be a decent trick in those decks, because you will have some of the cards like Gargantua or like the Evolution Witness that do make something when counter is being put on top of them. Or like Temperamental Uzwag, like you can get the surprise trample if it's not adapted and you are attacking with like no mana.
Trample plus Death Touch is pretty good, you know.
It is also my favorite combos, you know, putting the King Harold's Revenge on Flynn the Fangbearer, and watching opponent figuring out how many creatures do they need to put in front of my Finn in order to survive. So yeah, just like a neat one-off, and you know, you put a couple of the spell lands, you put a couple of the fetch lands, and everything is dandy.
Yeah, I think my version had like more 2-drops and less grind, because I was trying to lean into like the ooze coming down and then immediately threatening to like grow something.
By the way, yeah, Expanding Ooze is the creature. We didn't say what it does, but it basically is a 3/3 for 3, and then you can adapt it for 2 mana, so it becomes a 4/4. And whenever it attacks, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target modified creature. So if you play it on 3, it survives. On turn 4, you can adapt it before combat, attack with it, put a counter on it, and it's a 5/5. But you can also do something else, and you have something modified already. Then you attack with it and something else, and you put the counter on the modified creature. And yeah, it can get out of hand pretty quickly. It is, you know, fragile when you cast it. It's a 3 mana 3/3, which is good but not amazing. But it has potential to be running away with the game if the opponent doesn't have removal.
It is pretty hard to block it, though, like when you swing with it, right? Because the adapt is instant speed. So it can at least probably attack if it survives.
Also, like on turn 4, if opponent doesn't kill it on their turn, and you attack with it, you adapt. If they try to kill it, you can adapt in response, because you should have 4 mana by then. And then, of course, one of those triggers will fizzle, but the last one will resolve. So if they try to deal 3 damage to it or give it -3/-3, it might actually survive.
Yeah, I mean, you can also adapt it pre-combat and then swing and put its counter on itself, like its attack trigger counter. So
it really gets out of hand very quickly.
Yep.
For a 3 mana common, it's a pretty good rate. So I would say that this card makes the whole archetype, you know, slightly more realistic. And you know, let's not talk about situations when you play Cursed Wombat on turn 2.
Oh yeah.
Which will happen. I mean, it will happen. It's an uncommon and a common in the color combination. If it's open, you're going to get both in it.
No one's ever done that.
Surely nobody's put 2 uncommons together in limited before.
Nope. Right, let's venture into Jason's adventure in the Eldrazi land. Oh, God. Okay. I'm getting the audience ready for what's coming up by my sighs of disbelief. Okay. Walk us through this.
Okay, so, as you might see...
Unfathomable truth.
As you might see, it is, again, very, very bare bones. But imagine there's some green cards here, just random green cards. Like, any green cards will do. But basically, Sage of the Unknowable, as you might expect, is pretty good with Unfathomable Truths. And just, like, it's just a really strong card overall, right? Like, 2 mana dork. As an 0/4, it's like pretty hard to kill. It like blocks while doing your mana dorking. And it's really strong as long as you can find your like colorless spells, right? And obviously a lot of the part of it is like a lot of your colorless spells are going to be really expensive, right? But you also have just these strong colorless spells that are not that do some flexible things, like for example, Truths, right? Which lets you have a draw spell. You have the 2 mana deal 4 in red that's like colorless as well, that you can leverage the mana from Sage for. There's also there's the 1/2 Death Touch mana dork in green that I think is also pretty strong. And that's just another mana dork for this. But I was mostly just building this out as a blue deck, and like, you know, it's strapped for time a bit. But yeah, I just think that like Sage is very strong. You can get a lot of 2-mana mana dorks and like really have this like ramp plan with truths and like ramping into like big Eldrazi. I only play commons here, but like there's plenty of big Eldrazi that you can cast. That would be pretty great for you. And like one thing to note also, Sage can tap for mana for activated abilities, and there's like some cycling. For example, on the Drown Yard Lurker, you can cycle for 3 mana, tapping your Sage for one of those mana, and that also makes a Scion when you cycle it as well, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do with Sage basically, and you should be on the lookout for cards that are colorless, even if they're Eldrazi, right? Like a bunch of the Devoid cards are going to just be very strong with Sage, and like again, like this is just another way to take advantage of unfathomable truths, in some sense, because like I said, one of the strong parts about it is a draw spell that's also a ramp spell, right? You get more mana next turn.
Yeah, I think that's also like a really good strategy for pre-release if you're going to be playing, because cards like Unfathomable Truths are going to be so much better in sealed because of the lack of super coherent ultra aggro decks in your sealed pools, most likely. So you have that half a turn extra time in sealed, and that makes a big difference for cards like that.
Also,
you heard it here first. My prediction for top blue common: Unfathomable Truths, even in draft.
I think Demon Fury.
I think so too, honestly. Oh yeah, also your when you were talking about like damage-based spells, it's going to be really difficult for Sage of the Ennobled to actually die on turn 2, even if you're like on the draw. So
yeah,
like, it seems like the strategy seems like it probably is like pretty hard to actually disrupt.
Yeah, the one thing is like if your opponent's doing a bunch of modified stuff and going tall, like having a 0/4 might stop blocking pretty soon. But you can interact with things like Demon Fury. You could like chump block with Scions, perhaps. There's things that you can try to do, but yeah.
I mean, this probably also just buys you like a lot of time,
Yeah.
So yeah, great point.
Cool. And yeah, as you said, at Uncommon, there's so many of those 6-7 mana Eldrazi that will be just impactful. If the opponent doesn't have unconditional removal, they're just going to be hard to deal with. And don't get me started on any mythics in that.
Yep.
All right, we have the red-white face punch to end the stream.
Yeah. This deck looks really strong to me.
Yeah, it does look pretty busted in terms of the fun police of the format.
Yep.
Okay, let's that's sorted. So again, you started with the mandibular kite. I see one of your favorites. I was high on that, but I was not as high. I put it, I think, on most of my white things, but as a one-off.
Any white deck that wants to attack is going to want to draw one of these on average a game, probably.
It makes much sense. I mean, the difference between the kite sailed shield of being just an equipment and being an actual living 1/1 flyer on turn 1, that's a big difference.
I was considering like the 1/1 with haste as well, because I felt like the 1-drop was kind of important, but like I felt like it didn't have enough like use if I drew it later, because like it's not that good of a removal spell.
Okay, galvanic discharges of course make sense. You want as many of them probably as you can draft in any deck. It doesn't matter if you're energy heavy or just but this deck actually can make a very good use of it, because you got Conduit Goblin, which I think is pretty strong on turn 2.
Oh yeah. For sure.
Because on turn 3 you can cast your creature, spend 1 energy, give that creature +1/+0 and haste.
Yep.
Reckless Pyrosurfer, which is one of my candidates for the most busted uncommons in this format. It looks broken. It's a 2-mana 2/2 haste, which is already good in my book. And it has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Pyrosurfer gets Battle Cry until end of turn. And Battle Cry means when it attacks, all the other creatures you control get +1/+0, which makes it in this sort of like potentially Imodane Recruiter-ish kind of creature every turn when you play a land or when the land enters your battlefield. So you can just like sacrifice the fetch
I
land.
think I should have put one more fetch land in this deck.
If you would sacrifice, if you would play a fetch land and sacrifice it, does it get Battle Cry twice?
It does, yeah.
Oh god. Oh god. Why?
Yep.
Ow.
It's another one of those things where it's like on turn 6 you've been playing you have like you've played like 3 fetch lands and have been using them as like colorless lands, and you go like play this fetch.
Ow.
Oh,
Yeah, no, that card looks absolutely atrocious. Because it's so good early in the game, it will be also good late in the game. You have to probably play a bit around it by keeping some lands in your hand, so that you will always get that landfall trigger. And it has haste, so there's not much that the opponent can do at sorcerer speed to deal with it. You also have the Glyph Elemental, the Slits, the Unicorns. I think that's like a basic package of the white aggro.
Yeah.
Amp Raptor, yeah. You kill something with Galvanic Discharge, get a couple of energy leftovers. You cast the Raptor, you will probably be able to cast anything that you get in your deck. Mm-hmm. You get the Falter land.
Falter is really good here, I think.
Molten Gatekeeper. It's also like a good way of having some additional source of reach because it pings opponent for 1 whenever a creature enters the battlefield. It also has Unearth, so I can see the turns when you just cast your Unearth Molten Gatekeeper, cast Scurry of Gremlins, ping them for 2, swing with stuff, and finish the game. So that's like all very cohesive.
And I think Smash is going to be like a really important trick here too.
Yeah, Savage Smash, Siege Smash looks really good. It's 2 mana for split second, so it can't be countered or responded to, whatever. You choose 1, you destroy an artifact, which can be very relevant in some matchups, like super relevant.
Reliquary.
Oh, you said Essence Reliquary.
I said I coughed over saying Essence Reliquary.
Oh yeah, no, poor Essence Reliquary. And then in some games, it's just going to be a very good combat trick because it gives +3/+2 and trample until end of turn. I think it will be relevant in not only white-red, but also like black-red. You have a couple of those cranial plating, whatever it's called.
I mean, this deck has like a few ways to like buff like creatures' power as well. So like that, like with the Scurry of Gremlins,
with the
type stuff.
Sometimes it will be just enough to bump up Area Auxiliary into a 6/5. It's fine. You're just gonna be fine with this deck. It looks like it's going to be really hard to deal with this kind of deck. And you have this Koa Ember Mage, which you can cast it as a 6 mana 4/4 that thinks something for 4. But I think this particular deck, it's going to be often that I cast my Volstrom Angel, pump the team, swing, leave my opponent at 3, sacrifice 2 mountains, and go home. Like in the olden days. With the...
No, this is not Fire Blast. He has to be in play to activate the Grandeur ability.
Oh, wow. Oh, it has to be in play. Oh, you need multiple copies.
Yep.
Ah, well. Then get multiple copies and do that.
But the fact that you have access to both Suppression Ray and Sundering Eruption in these colors means that like blocking is going to be a little bit difficult against this color pair.
Yeah, and it looks like it has the out of the block speed. That's why if this thing is strong, it's going to be a problem for the format because that can mean that aggro is a bit favored in the matchups.
I don't see any problem.
Well, problem for trying to do the bouncy, blinky, draw 3 stuff.
Well, simply cast the card. What's it called? Ether Spike on their Falter. Don't let them resolve it.
You got me there.
Or just put Essence Reliquary in this deck so you can pick up your MDFCs.
Or just like have such a commanding control of the game that like even the Falter can't kill you.
Yeah.
or have a skill set that allows you to go like 29-7 in the last 3 Premier events. That's also It's also. Although, even with your skill set, Boros proved to be a tough matchup.
I've never lost to Boros in any important matchups. I'm not scared.
And that's the spirit. That's the spirit. You only lost to Lorehorde.
I mean, this deck looks like interesting, I think. I was also kind of, I mean, just like, you can go wide, you can play like a bunch of 2-drops that attack well, and I think that's like the main difference between like this format and the last one when it comes to this.
Yeah, I can see like some kind of a grindier version of white red as well, with like multiple scurries of gremlins if you're lucky enough, and just like
you could also like Molten Gatekeeper. If you get like a bunch of Molten Gatekeepers, you could try to do like Glimpse the Impossible and just like try to just like burn your opponent for a bunch. Just like try and ramp into like a big red Eldrazi, I guess.
Yeah, no, but clearly it has the early game and it has the ways of closing as well, and that's always a good sign for that kind of a deck. And it's like, I really don't want this format to be defined by a falter on a land, or another falter on another land.
They made 2 of them
for that.
Hey,
all right.
I think falters are completely fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I mean, I don't think there'll be like Hazardous Blast levels of like this is warping the format.
Hopefully not, because they are uncommon. But okay, that's it. We did all the 10 archetypes at different stages of completion and depth. I was much better in completion.
10.
Jason was much better in depth.
What was I better in depth? I think I was better at nonsense personally, but
well, that's
a valuable skill.
Nonsense is depth that has not been proven yet.
You're good at like hyping the potential fun things to be doing, right? Getting people excited about the format.
Yeah, I'm here for the hype.
Hot takes.
That's I did want to ask this before we left. What did you think about like the like mana bases of the decks that we presented? Like a lot of like we did like essentially like 3 fetch lands, like 2 or 3 like MDFs as like essentially 1-for-1 swaps.
So I think that you want to be playing so for example, in the Boros deck, I think you definitely want to be playing more lands. I would be playing at least 15 plus the 3 MDFCs, because like two of your MDFCs you really want to be casting as falters, actually. Like actually. And I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about having the fetch lands, because like you don't want to have that many tap lands in your Boros deck. You don't want to have to like fetch for them, especially if you want to play Mandibular Kite on turn 1. Like, it'll depend a lot on things.
But yeah, I guess like 18 is probably just like a better place to start from.
The real question is, how often are you casting your MDFCs as spells, and how often are you casting and playing them as lands, right?
That's
the main thing you really need to be asking yourself.
Yep. Honestly, this might be, Mike. I think that's like a good point.
Yeah,
it's very
easy. The question in chat was that is this set the most skill testing we've had in recent memory in terms of mana base building? And I think it's a sort of yes. I think every set can have challenging mana bases, but this one will be different because we have to chuck away most of our common knowledge in terms of how many lands do we put in the deck because of the combination of fetch lands and MDFCs.
I think also it's like very skill testing in terms of like where do we end up taking like the MDFCs and how highly we should value them.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that early they're going to be going pretty late, but later they're going to dry out much earlier.
Oh yeah, they're going to go pretty early, right? I would imagine.
So if you want to build 3-color decks, like full 3-color decks, do that in week 1, because later you're going to be just drafting Boros. And you don't even care about the fetch lands, you just need the falter land. All right. As it's approaching 2 a.m. here,
Oh wow.
let's close it. And I want to close it by giving you a unique opportunity of plugging whatever you have to plug right now. Let's start with Springbok, maybe, as the newcomer to the stream.
I mean, I don't really have anything to plug. I stream, sometimes on twitch.tv at Springbok7. And thanks to Sirkovitz and Jason for giving me this opportunity. Ton of fun.
Jason, what do you have to plug?
I guess I have a Twitter. Twitter's terrible though. I sometimes stream, not consistently though. But what I do want to plug is I write articles I'm pretty proud of at experimentalsynthesizer.blog. I have a lot of free articles there, and just like the last month of articles I write once a week is like behind a $5 paywall. But all of my articles eventually are free. I personally think I am pretty good at writing, so would recommend.
Sanctum podcast. Sanctum podcast.
So yes, so the only reason why I hesitate on that is because we are going through a bit of technical difficulties of like figuring out exactly how we're scheduling. But we should have a podcast episode out soon as well. Be sure to check that out. That's me, Autumn Burchett, and Nicole Tipple, talking about various things in competitive Magic. I don't know exactly when our next episode will be.
Look,
So
if the
I
next
can't promise that one
episode,
as much.
if the next episode will not have the story of the big tiny bones, I'm unsubscribing.
Oh, don't you worry. Don't you worry.
Good. Okay, well, that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for being patient with us. Hopefully you got a slightly better overview. It might not be, precise knowledge, because we're still not in the stage of the format where we can offer precise knowledge, but I hope that at least some of those takes are going to be useful. I think that the last version we did was pretty much spot on of what happened later in the format, so we hope that we can repeat the decent consistency. But before that, go out, play around, figure your own things, and generate 17 lens data, and don't you worry, I'm sure to be analyzing it in the future and telling you what you did through the lens of bigger population sizes. But with that, I'd like to thank mtgazone.com and my patrons, and I'll see you in 2 days when I'm having a last stream for OTJ, and I can tell you now that I will have a guest, and that guest is Paul Chion, so it might be interesting. And we're going to look at Paul's personal data that includes almost exclusively wins for some reason, and we're going to try to figure out what was he doing right, how can you be better than Aken, and more on that. So see you in a couple of days.